Star Trek the Motion Picture is a film that fans demanded and yet almost didn't happen. The troubled production is legendary, and it nearly train-wrecked multiple times. The final result was a compromised edit and missing some special effects completed after the drop-dead deadline. To be honest, that it got released at all was a miracle. But as with many Star Trek firsts, it missed the mark in many ways. Like Star Trek's original pilot The Cage, which some considered too cerebral, so too was Star Trek the Motion Picture, by both fans and detractors. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey, it lingers on images of starships and bizarre space phenomenon playing up their verisimilitude. It's certainly not as full of plot holes as The Wrath of Khan, or as outright dumb as The Final Frontier. You can tell that there was some thought put into it, and yet a number of really dumb things happen in this pretty smart movie. With that being said, I'm Bree from TrekCulture, and here are 10 of the dumbest things from Star Trek the Motion Picture. Number 10. Voyager 6's backdoor black hole. Decker. Voyager 6 disappearing into what they used to call a black hole. Ah, really? Tell me, how did that happen? The two real-world Voyager probes are pretty swift, and Voyager 1, the quickest, is zipping away at a healthy 17 kilometers, or for my red-blooded Americans out there, 11 miles per second, putting it in 2020 about 3 times as far away as Pluto. Sounds far, but that's peanuts to space. Cosmically speaking, it's still just on the sun's doorstep. By the movie's time, it would only manage to get about another 183 billion kilometers, or about 114 billion miles from the sun. So just where would this black hole be for Voyager to have fallen into? The two real-world Voyagers have expected operational lives of about 50 years. So, assuming the black hole must be somewhere a Voyager could reach before it went dark from lack of power, so anyone would know what happened to it, the black hole must be within 17.2 billion kilometers, or 10.6 billion miles from the sun. A starship puttering at warp 1 would cover that distance in a day, and at higher warp speeds would cross it in minutes. If there were a black hole close enough to our solar system for Voyager 6 to fall into, surely Starfleet, with its amazing sensors capable of surveying star systems at ranges of light years, would know about it. It would be kind of hard to miss that warp drive speed bump after all. Number 9. Too soon? Levity after Ilia gets nuked. Admittedly, Star Trek has always had a problem with this, especially at the end of episodes where the crew would have a hearty laugh after fellow crewmates were killed or civilizations were destroyed. And unfortunately, the motion picture does suffer the same problem. Decker. Precisely the point, Captain. We don't know what it'll do. Moving into that cloud at this time is an unwarranted gamble. Or so Decker cautions. But Kirk orders the ship in anyway, and right after, everyone is slack-jawed after hours of special effects on the view screen, and energy probe shows up and zaps away with Ilia, killing her. Decker, who had had a relationship with her, clearly has unresolved feelings and understandably snaps at Kirk. Decker. This is how I define unwarranted. The ship is then grabbed by a tractor beam and pulled inside the intruder vessel. Then, Kirk. Full sensor scan, Mr. Spock. They can't expect us not to look them over now. Decker. Now that we're looking down their throat. Kirk. Right. Now that we've got them exactly where they want us. And Decker smirks? Kirk just got his love killed and now Decker is smiling at the same joke? That's actually unbelievable and actually dumb. Number 8. V'ger's forgotten text message. Spock. The intruder has been attempting to communicate. Frequencies over 1 million megahertz, and at such a high rate of speed their entire message lasts only a millisecond. I am now programming our computers to transmit lingua code at their frequency and rate of speed. Spock calmly programs the computer to do this even as V'ger's second and unsurvivable weapon closes in on the ship. Naturally, Spock saves the day by transmitting a lingua code friendship message just in the nick of time. But whoa, hang on a minute. Just what was V'ger trying to communicate? What was the content of that super fast message? Well, you know what? We'll never know, because as soon as the attack is averted, the message is completely forgotten. Excuse me, but if an entity of such incredible power texted me on its way towards my home, I would sure as hell try everything to decipher that text message. They know nothing about the intruder, and yet the script renders the Enterprise crew so inept that they neither try to decode nor transmit more messages in hope of inciting a response. Heck, it would have given Uhura something to do in the story if absolutely nothing else. Imagine how creepy it would have been had the message translated to something as simple as, "Are you alive?" Number 7. Probe Couture. Minutes after being whisked away by the V'ger energy probe, Ilea's doppelganger replacement, the Ilea probe, materializes in the sonic showers of Ilea's quarters, buck naked for some reason, and that reason is Gene Roddenberry. Kirk actually shows a tiny bit of decorum and self-control here, working a panel to apply some spray and wear clothing in order to maintain a family-friendly film rating. But what an outfit! It's basically just a miniskirt robe. Oh, and no pants, of course. Ilea is from Delta 4, and Deltans appear to be completely hairless other than eyebrows and eyelashes. But are they really? Because with this outfit, we are only one basic instinct sit down away from finding out. And it gets dumber. Although barely seen in the film, it's the high-heeled pixie glass pumps that are the real head-scratcher. How is that leisure wear? Because I've seen clear heels before, and they're not normally worn for leisure. The real question here, is this what Ilea selected as her standard post-shower wear? Or is this ensemble all Kirk's doing? If the latter, it says a lot more about Kirk than Ilea. Number 6. Kirk's spacewalk accessory faux pas. Spock, I intend to calculate thruster ignition and acceleration to coincide with the opening of the V'ger orifice. This should facilitate a better view of the interior of the alien spacecraft. Okay, so let's assume that there's some reason the Enterprise didn't send probes out to do this. That means it's up to Spock to actually get off his ass and pull this stunt to get deep into the heart, or liver, of an alien craft and figure out what V'ger is. Kirk suits up and follows him out of the ship, all good, except the captain forgot one teensy thing, an emergency evacuation thruster pack. The same thruster pack he actually needs to allow Spock to penetrate the far-off rapidly opening and closing orifice in the first place. No thruster pack, no rocket ride, no catching up with Spock. Kirk is damn lucky that V'ger conveniently spit out Spock on course right into his loving arms. Aww. Otherwise, he'd be hanging around twiddling his space-suited thumbs. Oh, and since the thruster pack burns out after 10 seconds, how would either of them have gotten back? Yes, Kirk is rusty in this movie, but this just paints him as incompetent. Number 5. Where everybody knows your name. Small universe syndrome. You think the Star Wars prequels introduced the idea that everyone in the galaxy knows everyone else? Oh no. The motion picture has the Phantom Menace beat by about 20 years. Perez. Carbon-based units. McCoy. Humans. Ensign Perez. Us. Bones has been on the ship for less than 2 days, and yet somehow he knows the name of Ensign Perez, who he hurried past and who, like everyone else, wears no name tag. Now, remember, Bones was drafted back into service, so he presumably had been living his bearded New Age lifestyle for the 2.5 years that Kirk was Chief of Starfleet Operations. So, just how does he know this kid? Oh, but you thought it was just Bones? Because it's not. Chapel. I remember Lieutenant Ilea once mentioning she wore that. Like Bones, Ilea had been aboard the ship for maybe 2 days. She wasn't previously assigned to the crew, which is apparent because of the mutual surprise that both she and Decker share. So she's clearly one of the final crew replacements that Uhura mentions. So did she and Chapel just happen to know each other from previous postings? If so, how likely is that? Or did they become BFFs in the very few hours that the ship was racing to meet V'ger? You know, with that said, how small is Starfleet anyway? Number 4. The Naval Gazing Crew. So, just what are the brave 400 crew members of the Enterprise doing as they approach, cruise past, and get engulfed by the awesome alien unstoppable entity known as V'ger? Well, apparently nothing. Engaging in the ages-old art of naval contemplation. We get no hint that the crew, other than Spock, is doing anything other than staring bug-eyed and slack-jawed at the view screen, and presumably maybe out the windows. When the Ilea probe arrives, Kirk assigns Decker to try and awaken the real Ilea's memory patterns from within the probe. And that's it. Yeah, Spock does say this. Spock, Captain, all of our scans are being reflected back. Sensors are useless. Except, well, not really. Sure, V'ger might be reflecting their active sensor scans back at them, but it's clearly emitting energy in known wavelengths, including visible light. So there are still things that they could study. How about even just visually surveying the interior for clues? How about the crew being active instead of passive? During the original series, creator Gene Roddenberry frequently critiqued scripts for the lack of action and for not having Kirk active in the story. That's something he apparently forgot during this movie because from the moment they encounter V'ger until Kirk's big bluff, the crew apparently just sits on their hands, waiting. Sure, we can assume that the unseen crew is doing all these things, but you don't build dramatic tension that way. Just knowing the crew is doing everything they can to find answers but failing at every turn, leaving their last hope as Decker, would have been far more dramatic in a movie that needed all of the drama that it could get. Number 3. V'ger's hideous hygiene. Spock, I saw V'ger's home planet. Unbelievable technology. V'ger has knowledge which spans this universe. Sounds awesome, until this happens. Kirk, V-G-E-R. V'ger. As he reads the letters visible on the space probe nameplate, he then rubs the grime off of the nameplate and reads the rest. V-O-Y-A-G-E-R. Voyager. Voyager 6. So the movie is telling us that V'ger has knowledge which spans the universe, yet isn't smart enough to remove the grime and know its full name is Voyager and not V'ger? Okay. Number 2. The movie's time twaddle. So let's begin at the beginning. We find out that the intruder is less than 3 days from Earth and Enterprise will launch in 12 hours. It takes 1.8 hours from launch to zip out to Jupiter at impulse power. And then Decker says, Decker, assuming we have full warp capability, accelerating to warp 7 will bring us to IP with the intruder in 20.1 hours. But the warp drive malfunctions and Spock arrives to help. And here is where things fall apart. Kirk, Captain's log. Stardate 7413.4. Thanks to Mr. Spock's timely arrival and assistance, we have the engines rebalanced into full warp capacity. Repair time? Less than 3 hours, which means we will now be able to intercept Intruder while still more than a day from Earth. Now, Decker said it would take 20.1 hours to intercept the Intruder, which he continued to move closer. So let's shave 1.5 hours, about half the time they spent fixing the engines, from his estimate, and say they'll intercept in about 18.6 hours. Logical, right? Except, after going to warp, the very next scene is Kirk and Bones grilling Spock in the officer's lounge, at the end of which Uhura calls up and says, Uhura, bridge to Captain. Revised estimate on that cloud visual contact, 3.7 minutes. Hang on, they've been at warp for at least 18 hours, and Kirk decides to grill Spock at the end of that? What have they been doing during all of this time? What has Spock been doing? And it gets worse. Minutes later, they've intercepted the cloud and narrowly survived an attack. And when Decker recommends caution, Kirk, that thing is 20 hours from Earth. We know nothing about it as of yet. But Kirk said they would intercept more than a day from Earth, and now they're down to 20 hours? Where did those 4+ hours go? So, they head into the cloud, circle V'ger, Ilia gets zapped away, Enterprise gets pulled into V'ger's maw, the Ilia probe shows up, and Kirk assigns Decker to deal with it. Kirk's final log entry is after he sends Decker off with the Ilia probe, and starts. Kirk, Captain's log, stardate 7414.1. Our best estimates place us some 4 hours from Earth. Okay, wait. 20 minus 4 equals 16. What happened to those 16 hours? Sure, flying through the clouds and over V'ger felt like it took that long, but did they really spend almost as long trucking through the clouds and skimming V'ger as they took to warp to it? Or was it a shorter trip and Decker gave the Ilia probe a tour of every rivet on the ship for 14 hours while everyone else sat on their hands? Kirk and the scriptwriters really need a wristwatch. And speaking of time, next it's time for the single dumbest action in the movie. Number 1. The Klingons take potshots at V'ger. The film opens with the most epic act of idiocy by the Klingons ever. 3 of their battlecruisers approach the ginormous V'ger cloud, which Spock later describes as a 12th power energy field that makes Sulu's jaw drop. It's a power level which Decker says thousands of starships couldn't generate. Faced with this unbelievable enormity, what do the Klingons do? They shoot at it. What did you think they were gonna do? Maybe it's not obvious why this is an act of utter idiocy, because the magnitude of this cloud is difficult for a human mind to grasp. It's basically impossible to convey the scale here, but I'm gonna try anyway. The V'ger cloud is stated to be 82 astronomical units, or AUs, in diameter. This would cover our entire solar system out to Pluto. A Klingon battlecruiser is about 350 meters long. If you scale both down so that the V'ger cloud was as big around as the Earth, then the Klingon ships would be, drumroll please, 25% the width of a single red blood cell. Which wins in a fight? Even the newly boneheaded Klingons should have seen that coming. Not to mention that anything that could generate a power field of that magnitude is not something that you're going to want to shoot at, because even if it does notice your puny weapons, you don't want to find out what happens when it shoots back at you. And hey, the damn thing's making a beeline to the heart of your biggest enemy, Earth. Instead of shooting at it, the Klingons should have just stayed way back and waved as it went by. Dumb, dead Klingons. Not too many people would argue with me when I say that The Wrath of Khan is the best Star Trek movie ever, but it's imperfect in the way that most human endeavors are. This is unsurprising, given that when director Nicholas Meyer was offered the film, there was shades of the motion picture, but no workable script. In fact, 3 different scripts had been developed: the Omega System, the Genesis Project, and the new Star Trek. So Meyer and the producer identified all the bits they liked from the scripts, and Meyer wrote his first draft of a new script in just under 2 weeks, titled The Undiscovered Country. Well, actually, they retitled it to The Vengeance of Khan, but then they retitled it again to The Wrath of Khan before release, so they really couldn't make up their minds. Many revisions followed, but time was wasting and money was tight. The script and the resulting film were of astounding quality for such a time crunch project, but in that hurry, a fair amount of dumb things did slip through the cracks. So with all that history in mind, and with our love of this film firmly established, let's have a bit of fun while we look at the 10 dumbest things that happened in Star Trek Wrath of Khan. Number 10. Reliance Weak Password. The prefix code is a good idea for thwarting a hostile takeover of a starship, but a code of only 5 numbers is in the range of your upper end bicycle combination lock, 90,000 possible combinations. Have you ever looked at that bank of switches Spock flips to input the code? There are only 10 switches, 1 per number from 1 to 9 and 0, and each switch stays flipped after he uses it. Thus, each number can only be used once per code. This means no prefix numbers like 16303 or 01701, let alone 66666. This cuts down on the possible combinations by 2/3 to just 27,216. Most Wi-Fi passwords are harder to crack. Also, after Khan has been prefix coded and handed his ass, it's surprising that Mr. Superior Intellect doesn't figure out that this is what happened and try to locate the Enterprise's own prefix code in order to turn the tables on his old friend Kirk. But that would have meant showing Khan is actually intelligent, not just telling us. Number 9. Cadet dead meat to the bridge. With the Enterprise's bridge at the very tippy top of the ship's saucer, and with engineering in the cigar-shaped engineering secondary hall, there is no way that the bridge is en route to sickbay. So why then does the turbolift bring Scotty carrying the mortally wounded Cadet Peter Preston to the bridge? Ever since the movie opened, fans have either been crying in outrage over this, or offering rationalizations and justifications for it. The damage caused the turbolifts to malfunction. Scotty was so grief-stricken that he blah blah blah. Logically, they could have had Kirk step out of the turbolift on his way to sickbay and find Scotty with Preston in a line of wounded trying to get into sickbay. But then the audience might have been anticipating such a sight en route to McCoy, whereas the doors opening to this horror was indeed a shock. So that's the reality. It's only there for a punch in the gut dramatic effect, even though it makes 0 sense. Shocking? Yeah, absolutely. Dumb? Definitely. Number 8. Kirk and Bones both blow it. The film's story forces Kirk to catch the idiot ball in order to show him as old and worn out, and in desperate need to get his mojo back, which we can accept to a point, but it does go overboard in this regard, and does Bones dirty in the process. Upon discovering Tyrell and Chekhov on the Regula 1 space station, Chekhov emotes, Chekhov, "Oh sir, it was Khan. We found him on SETI Alpha 5. He put creatures in our bodies to control our minds." McCoy, "It's all right. You're safe now." Chekhov, "They made us say lies, do things, but we beat him. We thought he controlled us, but he did not. The captain was strong." Wait a Vulcan minute, Lieutenant Commander Bad Accent. And yeah, I'm also talking about me because what fun would this be if we didn't do some light teasing? But anyway, Chekhov just explicitly told them the titular space genius had put creatures in their bodies to control their minds, and what is the first reaction to this bombshell? Bones effectively says, "It's all good." What? The instant Chekhov admits this, both Kirk and Bones ought to have suspected Khan was behind every word coming out of the Reliant boys' mouths. Sure, Kirk is focused on the Genesis material and finding Dr. Marcus, but he's beyond thick here. And Bones? What excuse does he have? What sort of doctor hears two potential patients say they had foreign creatures placed inside their bodies to control them and doesn't immediately ask how and where and examine the living crap out of them? Kirk's not the one caught with his britches down. McCoy is tripping over the metaphorical pants around his ankles. Number 7. The inferior, superior intellect. Khan. Admiral Kirk never bothered to check on our progress. It is only the fact of my genetically engineered intellect that allowed us to survive. Much is made of Khan's intellect in the film, but he's dumb as a box of rocks throughout, let's be honest. Consider the following. Khan wants Genesis, yet tortures and kills the uncooperative Genesis team instead of sticking eels in them, or instead of taking any of the team with him when he has to leave Regula 1 in order to blow Kirk to bits. I mean, yeah, I get he's mad, but come on, he's a super genius. Next, Mr. Superior Intellect can't spot the most in plain sight code ever. Spock says hours would seem like days, and then explains the ship's status using days. 12-year-olds in the audience could decode that on the fly, so why can't Khan or his crew of fellow superhuman, or Savick for that matter? Yes, Khan has activated his Ahab obsession power-up, and he's phaser-focused on harpooning his white whale Kirk. And granted, his monumental ego and sense of innate superiority cloud his judgment to the point where he's easily duped and goaded into chasing Kirk into a nebula where he loses most of his advantage. But, like Kirk and Bones, he gets tossed the idiot ball and never once demonstrates any real smarts. This was not always the case. In one of the scripts from which the final film screenplay was built, and before his beloved wife was fridged, there was a dialogue that indicated Khan was indeed an extra special super genius. Khan. How are system controls working? MacGyver's. Very well. Command and remote functions are all tied through computer stations. How could you have designed it so quickly? Khan. This is a sister ship of the Enterprise. The Enterprise's manuals I absorbed 14 years ago are still fresh in my mind. Not only would such a dialogue have demonstrated that Khan's an actual smarty pants, ergo a real threat, it would have made clear how 14 supermen could have run an entire spaceship, especially with 10 of them on the bridge. Number 6. Wily Chekhov. In old cartoons, characters would frequently run the same path of a steamroller about to flatten them, or stand by dumbly before getting clobbered by a car or flattened by a boulder. Chekhov effectively does this on SETI Alpha 5 upon seeing the belt buckle. Chekhov. Botany Bay. Botany Bay? Oh no, we've got to get out of here now. Damn! He knows what this means, but instead of doing the logical thing, putting his helmet on and calling for extraction, assuming he even needs a helmet to do this, he and Terrell put on their helmets, step outside, and at the sight of the 14 survivors, freeze like a bug-eyed wily coyote watching as a train bears down on him. By rights, Chekhov should have tried calling the ship before stepping outside. You don't stop to explain when you realize you're standing over a live grenade. You run, duck, or throw yourself on it. And even if for some plot-convenient reason the comm didn't work inside the cargo containers, Chekhov should have been screaming for a beam out throughout their exit from the hatch and even as Khan's people moved towards them. But from the lack of alarm exhibited by Beach and Kyle on the Reliant, it's obvious no communication of any sort was received. One can excuse Chekhov's behavior after he gets an eel in the ear, but not his costly ineptitude at this stage in the story. It's no wonder he never made captain. Number 5. Universal Armageddon, but no rush. As David Marcus frets, as the Genesis proposal demonstrates, and as Spock and Bones' argument makes clear, the Genesis device has the potential to be a dreadful weapon if used where life already exists. We're talking about Universal Armageddon, Bones exclaims. In short, Genesis is a Manhattan Project, and Kirk clearly knows what it is before revealing it to his confidants. So why is it then that everyone's so damn blasé about Carol's cry for help? Consider this. Carol calls Kirk to ask if he gave the order, and states that someone is going to take Genesis without proper authorization. Mid-conversation, her transmission is jammed at the source. This isn't garbled communications, it's deliberate. Kirk calls Starfleet Command to try and get to the bottom of things, and when he clearly doesn't get an answer to what's going on, instead of, immediately calling to the bridge and ordering maximum warp to Regula 1, he meanders to Spock's quarters for a friendly chat, and then finally goes up to the bridge to order Sulu to go to Warp 5. Warp 5! Yes, it's a minor continuity point, but in the previous film, the Enterprise zipped along to meet V'ger at Warp 7 without even breaking a sweat. Warp 5 is like a police car driving below the speed limit while rushing to an active crime scene. Kirk ought to have been court-martialed for that. I mean, come on. Take things seriously, Admiral. As scripted, this would have been a better scene, as Kirk would have gone to the bridge prior to him going to see Spock. This was, however, swapped around in editing for dramatic effect, but at the cost of making Kirk appear to be not taking this whole thing as seriously as he really should. Number 4. Exit the eel. The influence of the baby eels is pretty shaky. How is it that T'Rell and Chekhov can sit by as their shipmates, Reliance crew, are marooned on Khan's barren sand heap? Yet, later in the movie, T'Rell manages to resist when Khan instructs him to shoot Kirk, a man he says he'd never met. Is Kirk really just that awesome? Rank does have its privileges, I guess. Or is actively murdering someone just too much for even eel influence? No, not really, as he vaporizes an innocent civilian just moments earlier. And after T'Rell phasers himself out of the narrative rather than Kirk, why is it that the eel in Chekhov's noggin chooses that precise moment to get the heck out of there? You could maybe argue semantics about what happened to its friend, but it's a little convenient, isn't it? However, for the past 40 years, fans have joked that there's another reason the Beast fled. It was starving to death, as Chekhov is brainless. Number 3. Kirk's unfair tactical advantage. Show don't tell is a truism in film and video, and while it's not always necessary to cross every T or dot every I, sometimes a film really ought to just make a tiny bit of effort to make clear how something improbable happens to happen. Case in point, when the Enterprise first arrives at Regula 1, Spock. Regula is a Class D. It consists of various unremarkable ores, essentially a great rock in space. Kirk. Reliant could be hiding behind that rock. Spock. A distinct possibility. Then, in a classic case of technology doing whatever the plot requires at any given moment, when Kirk returns to the ship from the Genesis cave, he orders tactical, and immediately a computer graphic shows him exactly where the Reliant is, orbiting opposite them, presumably having just left the Regula 1 station where we saw her seconds earlier. Now, how come they couldn't do that before? And how can they track her through an entire planetoid now? And why does it only work one way? Why isn't Khan all, there she is, at the same instant Kirk spots where the Reliant is? And just how long has the Enterprise crew known where Reliant is? Is this how she's managed to stay out of sight? If you can't tell, I have a lot of questions. One can speculate or manufacture all sorts of rationalizations for this, like how the Enterprise was receiving telemetry from Regula 1 that Khan didn't know how to access. But then it gives Kirk an easy advantage instead of showing him using his smarts or his experience as a starship captain. Taking obstacles away from the protagonist diminishes his efforts. It could easily have been addressed by simply mentioning sensor damage earlier in the damage report, or by having Regula 1 telemetry appear on the tactical display. But alas, they didn't. Number 2. Damn peculiar. Starfleet surely knows that the Reliant is assigned to Project Genesis, so when Kirk calls them concerning Carol's cry for help, the very first order of business should have been to call the Reliant and ask what's going on or if they know anything about it. Nothing in the film suggests that a call like this happened, or if it did, that Starfleet ever got back to Kirk about whether they could or couldn't get through. And Furthermore, despite being told they are, as usual, the only ship in the quadrant, they spot the Reliant assigned to Genesis not only in their quadrant, but closing fast. As soon as Kirk calms the bridge, he's ordering to try the emergency channels, so something is already odd. The moment Spock deduces there's something weird about Reliant's excuse about their chamber's coil is overloading their comm systems, that ought to been the last straw, but it wasn't. Now, from Carol's message earlier, Kirk knows that A, someone is trying to take Genesis, B, that Carol believes it's someone from Starfleet, as she said, "Did you give that order?" And C, her transmission gets jammed at the source. So, when the Reliant shows up acting damn peculiar, even too long out of pasture Kirk should have been able to put 2 and 2 together and acted with due caution. Yeah, I know the point of Wrath of Khan is that Kirk is rusty, but given everything leading up to the moment of the ambush, his hesitation and inaction serves to not merely portray Kirk as out of practice, but as an incompetent fool, responsible for the loss of Genesis and the Enterprise damage and casualties. That's almost dumb enough to warrant being drummed out of the service. Number 1. The Genesis defect. Even taking the movie on its own terms, that the Genesis planet even exists at the end is beyond absurd. The narrative makes it abundantly clear that the Genesis device is intended to be employed on an existing solid body. Why else would the Reliant be scouring space for suitable sites? Carol, Stage 3 will involve the process on a planetary scale. It is our intention to induce the Genesis device into the pre-selected area of a lifeless space body, a moon or other dead form. Yet, as the story climaxes, the Genesis device goes off inside the Reliant, which is itself within the Mutara Nebula. And somehow, the Genesis wave not only turns the entire nebula's gas and dust into some different kind of matter, complete with all sorts of plant DNA, but all of this conveniently falls together into a sphere in a matter of minutes. The icing on the cake, though, is that this preposterous planet just so happened to have formed within the Goldilocks zone of a star. Wait, where did that star come from? Was it the one Regula orbits, or did Genesis manufacture a star too? And how does that miracle planet just happen to have exactly the right angular momentum to go into orbit around that wherever it's from star? Ugh, and some fans complain that the red matter in Star Trek 2009 was dumb. But play by your own rules, movie. Star Trek 3 is a bit of a redheaded stepchild, and the only one of the Star Trek films which is really dependent on the audience knowing the events in its predecessor in order to fully land dramatically. A number of contrivances are employed to shuffle Spock back onto this mortal coil, and some of them are, well, kinda dumb. And with that, here are 10 of the dumbest things from Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. Number 10. Genesis goes poof. Genesis is truly an anything Muppet. It does everything the story requires of it, no matter how absurd. Case in point, conveniently blowing itself to smithereens. Exploding of its own volition is just as dumb as the idea that SETI Alpha 6 blew itself into bits in the Wrath of Khan. The amount of energy required to exceed the gravitational binding energy of an Earth-mass planet and blow the body into pieces that fly apart is literally astronomical. We're talking 200 nonillion joules. That's 200 followed by 30 zeros. That's as much energy as the sun emits in an entire week. Anything the size of a person that can transform an entire nebula into a planet that can blow itself apart with that sort of stellar energy output sure as hell must have been useful for something. Number 9. Shields first, evasive second. Esteban. We're under attack. Stand by for evasive poof. Upon the appearance of the bird of prey, Captain Esteban doesn't call for evasive action, he says to stand by for it. Worse, he doesn't call for shields, ergo, the lucky shot blows him and his crew to pretty sparkles. Granted, the Grissom is a scout ship and not a starship like the Enterprise, but even a scout ship captain should know to raise shields first. Heck, On the original TV series, the shields tended to snap on automatically when danger was detected. Esteban is portrayed throughout as rather ineffectual, but to be fair, in the shooting script he actually did call for shields first. Esteban, red alert, raise shields. Savick, Captain, what's happening? Esteban, we're under attack, stand by for evasive, stand by for... You can tell this dialogue was filmed because when Esteban says, "Oh my god," on spotting the Klingon ship, the bridge lighting is normal. But when they cut back to him replying to Savick, the bridge is suddenly at red alert lighting as called for in the deleted dialogue. Honestly, the film edit just does him really dirty. Number 8. Missing Mama Marcus. This film effectively pretends that Carol Marcus and the rest of the Project Genesis team didn't exist. In The Wrath of Khan, it's clear that Genesis is Carol's baby, and David works with her. But in this film, she's literally erased from the picture when she's removed from the Genesis tapes and replaced with Kirk. She doesn't even make it into the film's opening flashback, where Spock's funeral service has been edited to remove both her and David's faces. All the dialogue about Genesis makes it sound like it's David's baby instead of his mother's. Listen, we get it. They didn't want to use the characters, so they didn't want to have Carol as a loose end in this picture, or confuse the 7 viewers who would watch this film without first seeing The Wrath of Khan. This makes things tidier, but how hard would it have been for them to throw a bone to the members of the audience who remember the previous installment by simply mentioning her name? Actually, in Harve Bennett's March 23rd, 1983 first draft of the screenplay, there are several references to Carol by Savick and David, which make clear that she didn't know about David's use of protomatter. But no, they wanted David to be solely responsible in order to justify his sacrifice. And speaking of that, number 7, jumping to conclusions. Savick, my lord, we're survivors of a doomed expedition. This planet will destroy itself in hours. The Genesis experiment is a failure. David, Genesis doesn't work. I can't believe they'd kill us for it. Both Savick and David jump to some very unscientific conclusions here. Sure, David says he's used unstable protomatter in the Genesis matrix, but he clearly thought doing so might work, and the Genesis cave seemed stable. In fact, they both overlook what any real scientist would immediately suspect: the experiment was compromised. Remember, Genesis Stage 3 was designed to be used on a lifeless space body, a moon or other dead form. It sure as hell wasn't intended to go off inside of a starship containing things like antimatter, which happens to be within a nebula, nor was it intended to congeal a planet from such nebula. There were just too many variables to conclude it was categorically a failure. Perhaps the only believable aspect of this entire thing is that the untenable politics of this made the Federation scrap the entire project, destroy all the research, and give Carol Marcus a nice fat pension to disappear into darkness. Number 6. Kirk is commended, not court-martialed? When the Enterprise arrives at Earth, Admiral Moreau tells Kirk and his crew they will be receiving Starfleet's highest commendation, and more importantly, extended shore leave. The crew, many of them green cadets who never expected to go into battle, probably deserve the praise and the rest. But Admiral Kirk? If he had simply followed Starfleet regulations, the Enterprise would have raised its shields before Khan first attacked, and likely avoided getting pummeled in the ensuing battle. The consequences of Kirk's needless flaunting of procedure led to the Enterprise being trashed, the theft of the Genesis device, the deaths of Spock, Peter Preston, and who knows how many other casualties aboard the Enterprise. And most importantly, Kirk's negligence allowed Khan to detonate the Genesis device inside the nebula, creating the galactic controversy that sets the events of Star Trek III into motion. Kirk couldn't even plead ignorance of the regulations. In Wrath of Khan, Savick reminds him of General Order 12, with time to spare before Khan is in firing range, a reminder Kirk ignored at his own peril. It sounds like Kirk should have been first in line for a court-martial, not a commendation. Number 5. Tractor beam? Nay. So, just how did the Enterprise get away? Does the space garage not have a tractor beam, or does it rely entirely on the tug shuttles seen cruising around inside its cavernous guts? Okay, put your pitchforks away. Maybe it does have a tractor beam, and maybe Scotty disabled it and has been monkeying around trying to get the space doors open. But nothing in the script or the finished film suggests this. As such, we're just left assuming that it doesn't have one at all. Even accepting this, what about the Excelsior? The Enterprise is still backing towards the space doors, which are closed, as Captain Styles enters the Excelsior bridge. So, instead of ordering 1/4 impulse power, why didn't he just order tractor beams right then and there, instead of waiting until Enterprise was outside the garage doors? Additionally, why would Excelsior have orders to pursue if Starfleet didn't think the Enterprise could get through the space doors in the first place? None of it really makes sense. Number 4. Genesis by name. This is something of a continuity point, but in the previous film, Kirk has to go through a whole security procedure to even show the Genesis presentation to Spock and McCoy, neither of whom has heard of it before. So how is it that Genesis has become a galactic controversy to the point that even the goofy alien McCoy meets in the bar knows there is a planet called Genesis? And why does McCoy even assume that he knows that name? Okay, he's slightly cuckoo here, but really. Sure, it's reasonable to think a nebula erasing kaboom would be spotted by both friends and foe, but did the Federation just shrug and admit what it was, right down to releasing its name? Did someone working at Starfleet or for the Federation leak it? Did Carol Marcus give a press conference? It's either a secret or it's not. Make up your mind, movie. Number 3, the only ship in the quadrant, Redux. Just how dumb is it that the Enterprise is always the only ship around and about? In the motion picture, the Enterprise is the only starship in interception range of the oncoming V'ger cloud. In The Wrath of Khan, while on a training cruise, she's the only ship in the quadrant. In The Search for Spock, she's apparently still the only ship in the quadrant because nothing stands between her and the Genesis planet, except the Scout-class USS Grissom in orbit of said planet. Genesis is a known galactic controversy, and Starfleet hasn't positioned a single top-of-the-line ship in a position where it could rush in to provide assistance to the Grissom, stop potential enemy incursions, or thwart rule-breaking admirals named Kirk. Just how few ships does Starfleet have in this era anyway? Number 2, Spock's escape hatch. Can we all just admit that nothing about Spock's physical resurrection makes sense? The Genesis effect caused the microbes on the funeral torpedo tube to hyper-evolve from microscopic organisms to Klingon-choking worms. But in Spock's case, it did what? Rebooted him as an embryo? A newborn? A mindless infant who somehow had the sense to learn to walk without crawling out of an adult-sized funeral robe? So why did Genesis Control-Alt-Delete Spock instead of mutating him like the microbes? And just how did this mindless reanimated Spock manage to get out of a tube which can somehow survive an atmospheric re-entry without popping open? Or is there a convenient handle inside for the deceased to operate? If not, it seems like Spock would have been reanimated and just suffocate and or die of hunger and thirst in this sealed casket. And speaking of hunger and thirst, Number 1, the Genesis defect Redux. As in The Dumbest Things in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, in Star Trek III, Genesis remains thick-cut baloney all around. And, as in previous entries in this list, it does all sorts of preposterous things. But amongst its million household uses, it can somehow also provide ongoing sustenance to life forms that it animates. What were those fast-evolving microbes consuming in order to allow their incredible growth? And what about Spock? We never see him eating anything, so just what nutrients are fueling his violent growth spurs and his growing pains as he pulls an American Werewolf in London to go from teen to Leonard Nimoy? And isn't it convenient that they beam up and the Genesis planet explodes exactly when rapid-aging Spock just happens to look how he would've if he had lived 2 more summers past his irradiation date? The real answer is one sadly common on Star Trek, but pushed to the limits in some of the movies, and especially by Genesis. The science part of the science fiction is mostly no such thing. It's pseudoscientific sounding claptrap, which is essentially magic. The all-purpose Genesis effect is about as scientific as David Marcus waving a wand at Spock's coffin and reciting an incantation. In reality, such growth would require the former microbes and Spock be constantly eating and defecating, so perhaps we should be grateful that the producers went for the dumb magic science instead. For the longest time, Star Trek IV was the most profitable and popular film of the franchise, known even to non-Trekkies as the one with the whales. It was a hit because it didn't require you to know much about Star Trek in order to get it, and because it was a family-friendly film released in time for the 1986 holiday season. The voyage home is a bit of a romp. A fish-out-of-water romp with tongue planted firmly in cheek. And plenty of comedic moments, so you can't take it too seriously. But at the same time, it's not unreasonable to expect events in a film to make some sense, and for the characters to behave appropriately. In the case of this film, a number of silly things happen because they're expedient to the plot, not because they make a lot of sense. So, get ready to strap in with me, Bree, as we slingshot around the sun to find the 10 dumbest things that happen in The One with the Whales. Number 10. The space tugs stop when they lose power. Even as the Excelsior and the other starships and space docks sit on their figurative hands and are disabled, we see the engines go dead on a pair of tugboat shuttles, and they come to a halt. I'm sorry, but These are not motorboats on a lake whose engines die and their momentum bleeds off pushing against the water. These are spaceships in a near vacuum. Even if the preposterous airship hangar was pressurized, which there's no evidence of, their momentum should have carried them in straight lines until they smashed into a space dock wall or one of those disabled starships. Which makes you wonder, if the probe disrupts all the power sources employed by Starfleet and on Earth, what exactly happened to everything else when it pulled into orbit? It clearly didn't kill all the power because at Starfleet Command we see dimmed lights and scrambled, but operating, screens. So what level of power was affected? As the bird of prey gets knocked out immediately upon popping back into the 23rd century, we have to assume that every powered vehicle and delivery drone in the air above Earth plummeted and crashed. One hopes Earth's government grounded everything before this could happen, but given Starfleet's wait till after the last minute incompetence, this is unlikely, which means Starfleet is dumb. Number 9. If you're going to San Francisco. Kirk. There she is, from the Institute. If we play our cards right, we may be able to find out when those whales are leaving. Spock. How will playing cards help? Jillian. Well, if it isn't Robin Hood and Friar Tuck, where are you fellas headed? Kirk. Back to San Francisco. Sure, Kirk is a fish out of water in 1986, but he seems a little lost here. Perhaps he needs to turn around and take notice that the Golden Gate Bridge is behind Spock and himself, and that they're walking away from it. They're already in San Francisco when Jillian picks them up. In fact, they're on the Marina Green. And no, they're not on the Sausalito side where Cetacean Institute is purportedly located. The view we have of the bridge is impossible to get from the other side. Kirk may be from the 23rd century, but by all indications in this and previous films, the Golden Gate Bridge is still in the same place. Kirk must know where he is, so, to paraphrase Jillian, why the coy geography? Number 8. The father of transparent aluminum. With no transparent aluminum to be found in Ronald Reagan's America, Scotty and Bones have to seek out the clunkier 20th century equivalent, big slabs of plexiglass. There's no such thing as a free lunch, so they have to barter to get what they need, and the only thing of value to Plexicorp Planet Manager Dr. Nichols is Scotty's 23rd century knowledge of materials not yet invented. The movie has some fun with this by hanging a lantern on it. McCoy. Well, a moment alone, please. You do realize, of course, if we give him the formula, we're altering the future. Scotty. Why? How do we know he didn't invent the thing? How indeed? But even if Dr. Nichols was indeed the inventor, when something was invented could affect history just as much as who. And wait a second, why does it need to be transparent or even plastic? Clear plastics are not as durable as opaque ones, and plastics in general are less durable and more prone to leaking than stainless steel, so why? Oh, wait, yeah, it's a movie, and we want to see the whales, not slabs of steel. Number 7. He's a Ruski, but they're idiots. FBI agent, Commander Chekhov, Starfleet, United Federation of Planets? Right. Commander, is there anything you want to tell us? Chekhov, like what? FBI agent, like who you really are and what you're doing here and what these things are. Chekhov, I am Pavlov Chekhov, Commander in Starfleet, United Federation of Planets, service number 6565827D. Kirk told everyone to remove insignias before they left the ship, so why did Chekhov bring his ID with him? And why does he bother telling his interrogators his serial number? Sure, they're meaningless in 1986, but anything he tells them is going to be meaningless. He might as well claim that he's Antov Chekhov, the playwright. Speaking of dumb, the agents here are beyond stupid. They have no idea what the devices Chekhov carries are, and they just keep them on the table where he can reach them. Also, why is Chekhov being interrogated by a civilian when they're on board a ship? They're at the Alameda Naval Base. Surely they'd take him to a base facility. Number 6. The Whale Horizon. Zooming in on something hundreds or thousands of kilometers away in space is easy because there's effectively nothing between you and almost anything you want to look at. Down on the Earth's atmosphere, that's something else. Uhura. Affirmative. Contact with the whales. Kirk. Bearing. Uhura. Bearing 237, range 600 nautical. Kirk. Put them on screen. Jillian. How can you do that? How indeed, Jillian? Unlike in space, the trouble with looking at things far away on Earth is that Earth itself tends to get in the way. The further away something is, the higher above the surface you have to go to get a line of sight on it over the horizon. 600 nautical miles is 1,111 kilometers, and to even see the whales just on the horizon at such a distance, the bird of prey would have to have been at a minimum altitude of 96,179 meters, or 315,548 feet. But moments earlier, before Uhura reports the distance, we get a POV zipping through clouds under bright blue skies. Down where the clouds are anything over 200 to 280 kilometers away would be invisible over the horizon, and the lower you are in the atmosphere, the denser it is, and the harder it is to see through atmospheric haze. This is definitely an example of a science dumb. Number 5. Let's do the time warp again, and again. Time travel, as routinely depicted on screen, is pretty silly and almost never holds up to the barest of scrutinies because it usually ignores, or at least hand waves away, one basic fact. Nothing in the universe is truly stationary. The Earth spins on its axis as it moves on its orbit around the Sun, which itself orbits the Milky Way's galaxy center of mass, and the galaxy is in turn moving through space, which itself is expanding at an accelerating rate. Hop forward in time just 1 hour, and the Earth would have moved 8 times its diameter out from under you. As someone said, it's very cold in space. The slingshot around the sun thing at least avoids most of this, but in 300 years, the sun will have moved along its orbit just over 2 trillion kilometers, or about a third of a light year. So every time the bird of prey does its spin around the sun to go backwards or forwards 300 years, it ought to have to boogie a couple of trillion clicks to find the Earth. Time travel in movies, kinda dumb. Number 4. One little mistake. Star Trek IV is a charming movie, but action-packed it is not. So the chase through the hospital is a welcome bit of up-tempo fun at just the right point in the story. But what the characters are doing, that's pretty foolish. Why the heck do Kirk, Bones, and Jillian hang around in the surgical suite to save Chekhov, and then try to roll him out from under the noses of the police instead of just beaming back to the bird of prey? Oh sure, they don't want the surgeons and nurses to see the transporter whisk them away, but that's an easy fix. Just use a blanket or a surgical gown to cover the window and the door to the room where Kirk traps them. And sure, there'd be impossible to answer questions about how the patients and 3 intruders escaped a guarded room with only 1 exit, but it would have been a lot less risky. Fun scene though, even if they're behaving like the Keystone Cops. Number 3. Ahead Whale Factor 1. It's fairly preposterous that the Scandinavian whale catcher just happens to locate George and Gracie mere hours after they've been released into the ocean. Not only because what are the odds, but because presumably said whales were liberated from a port, as Jillian explains. They'll be flown in a special 747 to Alaska and released there. Territorial waters only extend 22.24 kilometers or 12 nautical miles from the baseline of a country's coasts, and humpback whales normally swim between 4.8 to 14 kilometers or 3 to 9 miles per hour, which means they could be out into international waters in a few hours. But even if the whales are outside the US territorial water, that doesn't make them fair game for foreign nations. The 1982 US Exclusion Economic Zone around Alaska extends 321 kilometers or 200 miles. It would have taken George and Gracie at least a day and a half to be fair game, even if they'd made a beeline perpendicular to the coast. Of course, one could pretend the whalers were violating US waters, they're clearly bad men, but who knew they were that bad? Number 2. He's dead, Jim? One of the big crowd-pleasing moments in the film was when Spock executes his famous Spock neck pinch on the rude punk blasting his boombox, a gag paid homage to in Picard Season 2. But put yourself in place of the other passengers on the bus. They see this punk being rude, and then this weird-looking character in a robe does something, and the punk falls face first onto his boombox, shutting it off. From their point of view, what happened? Do you know anyone who can put someone to sleep like that? For all they know, Spock killed a guy right in front of them. Maybe they hate punk rock music that much? In any case, Kirk and Spock were lucky the cops weren't waiting for them at the Cetacean Institute. Funny, but dumb. Number 1. Starfleet's Sitting Ducks. Starfleet Command. Space Dock, this is Starfleet Command. Launch all vessels, launch all vessels. Controller 2. Sir, Space Dock doors are inoperative. All emergency systems are non-functional. Controller 1. Engage reserve power. Controller 2. Aye, sir. Controller 1. Starfleet Command, this is Space Dock on emergency channels. We've lost all internal power. What's wrong with this picture? Starfleet knows this giant probe is making a beeline for Earth, and that it's knocked out at least 5 ships en route. Cartwright. Mr. President, the probe is headed directly for us. The signal is damaging everything in its path. The Klingons have lost 2 vessels. 2 starships and 3 smaller vessels have been neutralized. So, with this seemingly unstoppable unknown bearing down on them, does Starfleet set up a picket line of starships? Launch ships to approach this unknown from various trajectories in order to figure out the radius of its power neutralizing force? Or study it from afar? None of those. No, Starfleet does none of that. Starfleet keeps its great experiment, the Excelsior, and other ships parked in Space Dock with the doors closed until the probe is literally on top of them, with the result that none of them can make an attempt to contact or escape the probe. Starfleet saw this one coming. That's not just dumb, it's criminally negligent and dereliction of duty. Star Trek V is often touted as the worst Star Trek feature film starring the original series cast, if not the worst of all the film series. But there's no denying it's got heart, even if that heart is somewhere its liver should be. Of the films starring the original series characters, is this one the prime candidate for the number 1 dumbest? I don't know. Let's find out. I'm Bree with TrekCulture, and here are the dumbest things in Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. Number 10. Hiking to Heaven. As the shuttle Copernicus zips through the atmosphere of the planet at the center of the galaxy, Spock reports, "I am no longer in control of the craft." Whereupon, the shuttle lands near the Jupiter 2 crash site on Perplanis, near the Trona Pinnacles, California. Shakari. And the group disembarks. But if Mr. Godthing is in control of the shuttle, why did he set it down so far away from the spot where he'd make his grand entrance? Why not bring it down right next to his showroom? And even assuming there's a reason the shuttle couldn't land in a convenient parking spot, just how did Sybok know where to lead the hike? The filming location featured an all too apparent dirt road heading up the rocky pinnacles, but we don't see the party using it. Ignored road aside, was the center of those pinnacles just obvious, or was Mr. Thing sharing his location with Sybok over some Vulcan mind meld Wi-Fi? Number 9. Fan dance? Dumb. I dare say no fans were dancing in the aisles at this moment where the final frontier badly went where no Trek had gone before, by having Uhura do a burlesque act. It's stupid on several levels. First off, why would Uhura strip to her birthday suit to do this? Is it some unknown exhibitionist streak? I mean, it's dark, and where did the palm fronds come from? Second, did no one consider that the attendants of the stunted unicorn horses might not all be males? Maybe one or more of them might be, I don't know, crazy thought, gay? Or maybe just not stupid horny. Of course, if you think about it, the only women we clearly see on Nimbus 3 are a bartender, a triple-breasted furry dancer, and newly arrived Romulan Caitlin Dar. Maybe there's a lack of ladies on this rock, but it's still silly. Speaking of the lack of female representation, beyond Cybok's army of light appearing to be all bros, even Starfleet leaves the ladies out of the action. It's Kirk and the boys who charge the city, leaving Uhura to fly the shuttle instead of he's good helmsman Sulu. Number 8. The Godcast. As the shuttle Copernicus lands on Shakari, as Kirk and company stroll off on their God trek, they are watched by everyone on the Enterprise bridge via the main viewer. But the perspective is from off to one side of the shuttle. Who put the camera there? This is, of course, an old movie and TV gimmick and happened in previous Star Trek movies. That one shot alone wouldn't merit notice, but when Kirk gets zapped for asking why the God thing needs a ride, the voyeurs on the bridge all gasp in horror. They're clearly still seeing what's happening on the planet, but how? Just who or what is transmitting this? The God thing? Sure, an omniscient viewpoint seems perfect for an upper or lowercase god, but we know this one's just a wolf in cheap clothing. No one in this film ever questions how they're seeing all of this in the first place, and if they're receiving some sort of live stream godcast. It's dramatic, but it's also dumb. Number 7. Dead alert. When the ship's sensors detect the Klingon bird of prey has also breached the Great Barrier, some screens display a visual warning reading, Klingon vessel in quadrant. Recommended activation of defense systems. Of course, no one notices because they're all glued to the TV watching the Godcast from Shakari. What sort of crap warning system is so easily to be missed because people are distracted? This appears to be a purely visual warning, unaccompanied by so much as a bleeping alarm sound. An audible alert of some sort should have sounded. Number 6. Spock rockets. Spock's rocket boots are involved in a pair of incredibly dumb moments in the film. First, after distracting Kirk into falling off the side of a mountain, he rockets after and catches him just short of falling and hitting the ground. But as they hover there, the rockets are not pointed straight down, but about 45 degrees off to one side. And thus they should either be jetting off screen right, or careening off and crashing to the ground. Later, in Turboshaft 3, as Kirk and McCoy begin climbing, Spock exits from the bottom of the shaft, then, after a bit, descends from above via his rocket boots. How the heck does that work? If the point of climbing this out-of-service turboshaft was to minimize the risk of getting caught, then how did Spock get above them? Riding a functional turbolift? And here I bet you all thought I was going to talk about the out-of-sequence numbers for 78 decks in a 20-deck tall ship. Number 5. Shoot him. After being tossed in the brig when Kirk and Bones chew out Spock, the Vulcan explains, "I cannot kill my own brother." Maybe not, but that's a total screenwriting dodge. It's pretending that Spock's only choice is a simple binary, kill Cybok or let him take the ship. But that's Sailot poop. Spock could have, shot Cybok in the arm or the foot, or used the rifle as a club. He could have even tossed it aside and thumb wrestled him. Anything to give Kirk a few precious moments to run off and sound the alarm, seal the hangar, or take any sort of action other than sitting on his ass doing nothing. It's annoying because this is the worst sort of plot contrivance, and Kirk looks just as bad because he doesn't take action as Spock confronts Cybok. When every second counts, you make every second count. D-U-M-B. Dumb. Number 4. Klingon crap. Virtually everything about the Klingons in this movie is silly, but rather than list each dumb individually, let's lump them together for convenience. Vixis reports the Pioneer 10 probe Claw shoots is most difficult to target, but come on, it's just spinning like a top along a straight line trajectory through space. It's hardly bobbing and weaving. The Klingons can conveniently eavesdrop on Kirk's communications with the Enterprise and get distracted into targeting the shuttle instead of the starship. Later on, Kirk's emergency communique from the Enterprise to Starfleet Command is also intercepted and a fake reply sent. Encoded messages, secure communications, who needs them? Claw wanted to defeat Kirk in battle to prove he's a great warrior, but throughout, he's willing to cheat by taking a pot shot at a shuttlecraft or go after the Enterprise when it's been hijacked and Kirk is not in control. How exactly is that besting Kirk in battle, Claw? In the end, the Klingons serve no function in the story other than to just be momentary stumbling blocks for Kirk and Spock, and dealing with them really tests none of the heroes. They're there because they're easy villains, which, of course, say it with me, is dumb. Number 3. Crash dummies. The Galileo shuttle makes a risky improvised emergency landing plan B, crash landing, and no one runs down to check for casualties? From Scotty's reaction to Kirk's announcing B for barricade, it's clear this is not going to be any sort of ordinary coming aboard. Only Scotty goes to check, and he does so from what's apparently the flight deck control room. So why are no emergency personnel sent down to the hangar? Is the ship that empty? And since this has come up several times, just how empty is the ship anyway? Watching carefully, there are 27 Starfleet types who appear. This doesn't even seem to be enough for a less than skeleton crew. At best, maybe a couple of finger bones? Anyway, when 6 of them are left on the planet, there are a minimum of 21 on the Enterprise. Even taking Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, and Sulu out of the occasion, that's still 16 Starfleet to Sybok's entire party of 12 seen leaving the shuttle. Scotty spots Sybok's armed party coming aboard the ship and does nothing. He doesn't sound the alarm, or even punch an intercom to warn Chekhov on the bridge so he can lock the doors, turn off the turbolift, get hand phasers to stun the intruders, or even bonk them on the head with that broken log recorder. No, stupid Scotty just skulls off to the ship's sewers to hide out. Number 2. Kirk's ignored pain. So, what exactly is happening with Sybok when he wrestles with Kirk over the weapon in the hangar deck? He seems to be enjoying toying with his weaker human. This is actually a side of Sybok we sadly never see again, because it hints he's not all goodness and light. But that unexplored characterization aside, why does Sybok wrestle at all? Why not just pull his patented "I can feel your pain" thing with him right then and there? He has zero issues about doing it to the ambassadors, the bridge crew, and then Bones and Spock. Why not just quell any resistance by freeing Kirk? Better yet, why does Sybok wait to attempt to do this to any of them until they're on board the Enterprise, rather than when he's down on the planet surrounded by his zealot followers? He can't have known the Enterprise has an easily overcome, barely skeleton crew on board. He should have expected to face hundreds, ergo he shouldn't be taking the risk that Kirk can't somehow flip the situation in his favor. The whole thing reeks of plot contrivance. Surprisingly though, that's not the dumbest thing of all. Number 1. Squandered Sybok. When concocting the story for The Final Frontier, director and star William Shatner was reportedly struck by televangelists and how they build cult-like followings, and thus he conceived of a religious fanatic as the antagonist of the movie. It's an interesting notion. If someone could come along and magically erase all the emotional pain that holds you back, it's logical that you'd want to share that with everybody. It's rather like the euphoria of feeling born again. What could have been an analogy to cults and how they turn converts against their families and societies through brainwashing and use them to advance the cult's goals isn't explored at all. Seeing how even the Enterprise crew family might be influenced by a charismatic figure who can hit each in their emotional core held the promise of a terrific drama. What does it take to break their emotional bonds and make each member of the crew decide to follow Sybok instead of Kirk, and by extension Starfleet, and the mission that they've spent decades on? But the problem is that the movie is not actually interesting in its core premise. The plotting is a textbook amateurish mess that gets lost in the weeds and loses focus on what it should be about. It ends up as a fetch quest to find a false god. Pointless Klingon crap, lame would-be comedy, utterly missing that its primary antagonist's core power should make moot much of what's happened, when, in almost every circumstance, He could have just strolled in, brainwashed everyone into willingly helping him, and been done. It's a movie stuffed full of elements with the power for a truly compelling adventure into the final frontier, but it's unfocused and episodic, and it fails when it comes together. What a waste. What a waste, my friends. And you know what? Waste is dumb. The critical and box office failure of 1989's Star Trek V: The Final Frontier was almost the final installment for the original series crew movies. But with Trek's 25th anniversary in 1991, Paramount was eager to cash in with a better swan song. The resulting The Undiscovered Country aims high with its end of the Cold War allegory, moments for all the regular cast, an innovative zero-gravity assassination sequence, characters facing their various prejudices, a scenery-chewing performance by Christopher Plummer as Klingon General Chang, and a tense cinematic space battle intercut with a second assassination plot. What's not to like? Well, for all the pluses, there are minuses. In addition to some heavy-handed and arguably out-of-character bigotry, and literary quotes laid out with the subtlety of a photon torpedo, there are also some things that are just plain dumb. So, with all that being said, I'm Bree from TrekCulture, and let's discover 10 of the dumbest things in the Undiscovered Country. Number 10. Mighty Morphin Moronic Martia. Cameloid Martia says that her shapeshifting takes a lot of effort, and she's part of the plan to set Kirk and Bones to get killed while trying to escape, which means she knows the Klingons are coming, so why is she so stupid as to take the form of one of the assassination targets right before the axe is about to come down? And when the baddies arrive, why doesn't she shapeshift into something else when a Klingon commandant shows apparent confusion? Doesn't she have enough Mighty Morphin mojo to do so? And if she doesn't, then it's doubly stupid that she took on Kirk's form in the first place. Furthermore, in all 3 of the other forms we saw her in, she spoke in her own voice. So then why did she choose to imitate Kirk's voice while doppelgangering him? And when the chips are down, why not revert to her own voice? No witnesses! The script makes plain that the commandant knows who he's shooting, but as played, he appears confused, which makes Martia's behaviors appear not just dumb, but hopelessly thick. We suspect this whole business exists entirely to have the whole Kirk getting vaporized shot for the trailer. Number 9. Officer thinking, start your drinking. Kirk. Would you and your party care to dine this evening aboard the Enterprise with my officers as guests of the United Federation of Planets? After Klingon Chancellor Gorkon accepts, Lieutenant Valeris offers, Valeres, Captain, there's a supply of Romulan ale aboard. It might make the evening pass more smoothly? Kirk, officer thinking, Lieutenant. And yeah, about that, how can Kirk possibly believe Romulan ale will make the evening go more smoothly? Intoxication tends to lower inhibitions and loosen tongues. Or does Kirk think getting hammered will make him personally feel better, and damn the consequences? It's not as clear as is played in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, but Romulan ale is supposed to be an instant drunk, which explains Kirk's odd change of expression on first sip. And here you thought he was reacting to the taste. Instant drunk or not, in a precarious political situation over a formal dinner with an enemy of 70 standing years, how could anyone possibly see loosened inhibitions as a good idea? It doesn't help that the scene is edited badly, so... Number 8. Holy ozone. Spock. The moon's decimation means a deadly pollution of their ozone. They will have depleted their supply of oxygen in approximately 50 Earth years. Say, what? What does pollution of their ozone even mean? Is it akin to the human-produced chemicals responsible for the Antarctic ozone hole in the late 20th century on Earth? If so, such depletion increases the amount of ultraviolet radiation that reaches a planet's surface, with corresponding physical ailments and genetic and immune system damage. But it doesn't deplete oxygen. It comes across like they just tossed a word salad from some environmental lingo heard on a news report of the era. And yeah, I can attest to that, having a degree in that field. This makes no sense. This makes no sense at all. This is a case where they definitely should have dropped the buzzwords and said something more science fiction-y and direct. Like that the resulting subspace shockwave caused tremendous and lasting environmental damage, requiring them to move the entire population of the planet, Kronos, to another world. This isn't even technobabble, it's just dumb science. Number 7. The Viridium Patch. From the film's premiere, fans complained that there's no way the Klingons would send Kirk and Bones to the Gulag in their Starfleet duds, complete with the Viridium patch that Spock coolly stuck to Kirk's jacket as they left the bridge. But this is actually somewhat believable and has earthly historic precedent. Under the terms of the Geneva Convention, prisoners of war cannot be stripped of their uniforms, insignias, etc. And there was some controversy at the Nuremberg trials when accused Nazi defendant uniforms were stripped of insignia and medals. As such, it's not unbelievable there's some Organian peace treaty or whatever terms which would allow Kirk and Bones to stay in their monster maroon uniforms. The thing that is unbelievable is that the Klingons would not go over these duds with a nanometer tooth comb looking for anything out of the ordinary. Do they not notice that Kirk has the thing stuck to his shoulder? Something absent from Bones' uniform and any other they've ever seen? Would this not be seen as even a bit suspicious, or did Kirk tell them it was some fuzzy metal? And how is a patch of fuzz detectable at a distance of 2 sectors? Also, does Spock just happen to keep one of them at ready in his pocket at all times, ready to slap on Kirk at the event he does something impulsive? The original series often portrayed Spock as an all-purpose Swiss Army knife, but this is really pushing it. Number 6. Gravity boobs. One of the film's most striking sequences is the zero-gravity assassination of Chancellor Gorkon. As good as the sequence is, it's got some stupid stuff in it, and we're not talking about the pink blood. Kronos 1's artificial gravity is knocked out by the second photon torpedo hit, and in Chancellor Gorkon's stateroom, he and 2 aides immediately, but slowly, drift out of their chairs, and one's weapon conveniently pops out of its holster and spins off. What's wrong with this picture? First of all, absence of gravity is not negative gravity. Unless these men pushed off against their bolted down chairs, the table, or the floor, they'd pretty much stay put. Same goes for the holstered weapon. Friction would have held it in place. Second, if they were concerned about free-floating helplessly around the room, they ought to have just grabbed a hold of the seemingly fixed table. And if they sense betrayal, deliberately push off and try and get to the nearest door and escape. That these boobs just flail about helplessly shows no smarts at all. Interestingly, one of the 2 aides in the stateroom with Gorkon somehow manages to get outside of that room by the time the assassins arrive, and they phaser his arm off on their way in. If he could do that, then why did Gorkon and his other aides just hang around? Near the end of the sequence, some unidentified Klingon pushes a random button on a wall and the gravity snaps back on. Was it that easy? Did he have a role in the conspiracy to delay switching the gravity back on until the assassins beamed away? Because if there's no inside man, what would have happened to the assassination had the Klingons managed to turn the gravity back on sooner? Finally, who beamed Burke and Samno to and from the Klingon ship? Valeris was on the bridge. Can the transporter be programmed to beam people out and back on remote signal? Great sequence, though it's still dumb. Number 5. Cloaking plot devices. Spock, gas. Gas, Captain. Under impulse power, she expends fuel like any other vessel. We call it plasma, but whatever the Klingon designation is, it is merely ionized gas. Uhura. Well, what about all the equipment we're carrying to catalog gaseous anomalies? Well, the thing's gotta have a tailpipe, and thus, utilizing surgically altered photon torpedoes, the Enterprise is able to hit General Chang's invisible prototype bird of prey, and, with the Excelsior, blow it to Kingdom Come. Exciting. But does it make any sense? Fans have long pointed out an error in the narrative that it's Sulu's USS Excelsior that's established as cataloging gaseous planetary anomalies. They're right, but it's not the screenwriters being dumb. A brief deleted scene on the Enterprise contained this dialogue. Gorkon, your research laboratory is most impressive. Kirk, Starfleet's been charting and cataloging planetary atmospheres. All vessels are equipped with chemical analytics sensors. Which would have made clear that it wasn't just Sulu's ship which had equipment on board, but that's not the problem. The real issue is it's clumsy. Nothing anyone does in the story works as a setup for this. In fact, it feels like someone imagined a way for a torpedo to hone in on a cloaked ship, then went back and put in a couple throwaway lines to rationalize it. It doesn't show our heroes being smart by figuring out a solution based on things that have happened in the story, they're just handed a solution that Spock conveniently remembers when the narrative requires it. It doesn't feel earned. And in a franchise sense, the dumbest thing here is that it took so long for anyone to think about tracing a cloaked vessel's exhaust in the first place. Number 4. Intercom idiocy. Chang. I am as constant as the northern star. McCoy. I'd give real money for him to shut up. You and me both, Bones. What McCoy really should be questioning is just how Chang's voice is getting on the Enterprise's shipwide public address system in the first place. And in the second place, why can't Uhura switch it off? Any comm system open enough for an outside force to broadcast through to your crew is a serious flaw and breach of ship safety. If they can force signals into your comm system, they could flood it with noise to interfere with valid orders being given. Number 3. Lost in Universal Translation. Since the 2009 Star Trek film, Uhura has been depicted as a polyglot with an affinity for languages. But this wasn't the case in the original series or the movies with the cast. She was, as they used to say, a radio man. Her expertise was demonstrated to be with communications equipment, not with languages. So it makes sense that she wouldn't necessarily know the Klingon language, especially with the universal translator handy. In this film, she must communicate with some Klingons at a listening post and fool them into thinking the Enterprise is the freighter Ursva, doing so with the assist of 8 of her shipmates, including Scotty and Chekhov, and not employing the aforementioned universal translator. Well, sorta. On a screen, she's looking at the universal translator translating Klingon into Federation Standard, aka English, but for some stupid reason, the reverse isn't true. An off-camera and obviously dubbed line by Chekhov claims a universal translator will be recognized as an excuse. So, is its translation less believable than a bunch of people paging through ancient textbooks fumbling for the right thing to say? Okay, fine, maybe the universal translator has some tells that can be detected, but why not have it spit out a translation that you can check against the books? Or, hey, given someone, presumably Valeris, altered the databanks to show they'd fired torpedoes, why not say that someone has sabotaged the universal translator and it only translates to Pig Latin? Honestly, that would be less dumb than the scene that we got. Number 2. Space battle? What space battle? Let's consider the Enterprise's pummeling by Chang's bird of prey on approach to Camp Kittimer. There are representatives of the 3 major powers present, Federation, Klingon, and Romulan, which suggests at least 3 spaceships brought all these people to the planet. Where are they, though? And how is it that none of those ships spot the renegade and implicated in Gorkon's assassination USS Enterprise racing towards the planet, and then inexplicably being hammered by photon torpedoes? And then the Excelsior shows and gets similarly hit. Does no one see any of this? Undetectable fire while cloaked bird of prey aside, 2 Federation starships bearing down on these secret space talks ought to have been spotted by someone. Were the only ships allowed to come to the conference unarmed civilian space liners that either all landed or warped away? Does the Kittimer outpost have no means of detecting ships in space? Or is it a dumb oversight on the part of the filmmakers? We're gonna go with the last one. Number 1. Starfleet groupthink. One of the least believable things in the first 6 Star Trek movies is that 7 members of the crew have stuck together for 20 years with only 2 exceptions, largely staying in the same roles, and at the same damned stations for all that time. Those exceptions? Chekhov went from navigation to weapons and defense in the motion picture, and then served as first officer on the USS Reliant in The Wrath of Khan, but by the 3rd film was back navigating at his old post. Sulu never budged from the helm until his 6th movie, where he is inexplicably the captain of the Excelsior. But 6 movies in, Uhura is still opening hailing frequencies, Scotty is still making the ship go, and Chekhov is still plotting courses and substituting V's for W's. It all feels static. The static dynamic gets even more preposterous in The Undiscovered Country, where we learn that, with the exception of Sulu, they are all going to stand down in 3 months. The lot of them, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, Uhura, and Chekhov, are all going to be decommissioned seemingly at once. Why? They didn't all join at the same time, their officer commissions weren't all issued at once. The story treats them as if they're joined at the hip, as some fixed unit which cannot function unless all parts are there. It doesn't really make sense why they're all exiting the service at once. The real reason, of course, is it's the actors' retirement from their roles being literally reflected in the narrative, and that's kinda dumb. Let's face it, Star Trek Generations is a jumble of disconnected elements that aren't particularly interesting on their own and fail to come together as a coherent or compelling story. The writers, Ronald D. Moore and Brandon Braga, have acknowledged that they were handed a checklist of must-haves for the film, which hindered the resulting screenplay. The pair wrote the feature simultaneously with the series finale, All Good Things, which made it difficult to give the film the attention that it required. Compounding this, neither of them had prior experience writing a feature film, which is a different beast compared to a TV episode, so they were a bit out of their element. For all that, the fundamental issue with the movie lies in the contrived mechanism they devised to bring Kirk and Picard together. The Nexus. It's an anything Muppet that does whatever the story requires at any given moment, no matter how unbelievable, nonsensical, or just plain dumb. It's so dumb that we could write 14 items about it alone, which we did over on our website, but here we're gonna talk about just 10 of those. So with all that being said, I'm Bree from TrekCulture, and here are 10 of the dumbest things in Star Trek Generations. Number 10. Kirk plays as Shatner. Even in his Nexus fantasy, Kirk cautions Picard not to accept promotion out of the captain's chair, to stay where he is and make a difference. That's exactly in line with what we saw Kirk doing in the opening sequence on the Enterprise B, right? So given that, why in the name of hell would Kirk's fantasy be set anywhere but on a starship? He ought to have been back on some version of his Enterprise, Spock and Bones at his side having a TOS-style adventure. In fact, opening scenes of the film were originally conceived and scripted to bring the big three of TOS back. But both DeForest Kelley and Leonard Nimoy turned down the opportunity to reprise McCoy and Spock for pointless cameos. Having them appear as illusory versions of themselves counseling Kirk as they always did might have made roles compelling enough to merit them signing on. But no, instead of Shatner playing Kirk, we're given Kirk playing Shatner, pandering to the actor's equestrian interests, almost none of which has anything to do with the character of Captain Kirk. Number 9. Modesty forbids. Like Bruce Banner's trousers, which survive hulking out without being torn asunder in a wardrobe malfunction for the ages, the Nexus preserves modesty by being incredibly selective about what it scoops up and what it doesn't. On Viridian 3, it scoops up both Soren and Picard, but leaves the rocks and Soren scaffolding completely intact. This ribbon of a spaceship-crushing joy selectively picks up not just the men, but their clothing, while managing not to collect bits of what they're standing on? It's hard enough to buy that the transporter can do it to this degree, but at least that's plugged into a supercomputer. So how does the Nexus know to collect Picard's boots rather than stopping at his socks? Is it intelligent? Modesty is fine, but when a galaxy-surfing phenomenon knows to do it, it's a little stupid. Number 8. That's some mighty stellar cartography, Mr. Data. There's zero indication that the Federation has much understanding at all about the Nexus. So how is it that Data can get the computer to project how the destruction of the Viridian star will alter its trajectory? Of course, the simple, logical solution is staring us right in the face, but the movie misses it. While in stellar cartography, Data and Picard are trying to connect the implosion of the Amargosa star to the Nexus, and had Data noticed that the Nexus was not quite where it was projected to be based on previous data, then we could buy that he could deduce that the alteration of gravity resulting from the destruction of the star was the key to the Nexus's deviation. And from that, he could logically project how the potential destruction of the Viridian star would alter its course to skim Viridian 3. Simple. But no, who needs to show the characters figuring things out when Picard can just make a mental leap and Data can inexplicably project a course with no real, data. Number 7. Data's over-emotional chip. From his first appearance in the series, Data professed a desire to be more human, and his emotion chip seems to be the ticket to that dream. The film had the opportunity to not only explore the reality that these newfound emotions aren't what he expected, but to have an arc wherein how he deals with their reality could have effectively reinforced or counterpointed the Nexus. which likewise concerns people fulfilling their fantasies, and, at least for our heroes, finding such illusions unsatisfactory. Sadly, the film doesn't do anything interesting with this idea. Instead, they just play at Data's being overwhelmed and go for comedy by having him say or do things that he otherwise wouldn't have done. And honestly, would new emotions alone trigger someone who's never employed profanity to suddenly curse? Well, it would if all you're after is a cheap, dumb laugh. Number 6. That the space battle lasts more than 10 seconds. That the mighty USS Enterprise gets taken down by a lowly, ratty Klingon bird of prey was ironic the first time it happened back in 1984, but doing it again a decade later wasn't just lazy, it was dumb. In the search for Spock, it was believable because the starship was in a bad way and less than a skeleton crew, and Kirk literally blows the ship to bits to take out as many bumpy-headed space Vikings as he can. In Generations, the Enterprise D is in perfect working order, and the only reason it's mortally wounded is the utter incompetence of the writing and how that trickles down to the crew. When the Duras sisters are able to torpedo through the Enterprise's shields by learning their frequency, what does William T. Riker, in command of the mightiest ship class of the time, do in response? He orders evasive action and then fires the phasers, which the ship does only twice. The ship then turns around while presenting a big, fat, stable target. He doesn't think to, call me crazy, change the shield frequency, or do logical things like go directly to warp and zip past the Klingons and out of the line of fire, or, to quote Nero in Star Trek 2009, fire everything! With so many options before him, the script forces Riker to fight it out at putt-putt speed just so the Enterprise can lose. Had Riker not been tossed the idiot ball, he'd have ordered Worf to open up an economy-sized can of whoop-ass on the Duras sisters and pounded them to Klingon cum. But no, the movie falls back on the show's lazy tech-the-tech trope and has them invent some kind of convoluted way to lower the Duras sisters' defenses and lob one slow-motion torpedo at them. It'd have been far more satisfying, and less dumb, to watch the mortally wounded ship wipe the deck with the Klingons before it too succumbed to its wounds. Number 5. Would you try lithium? In a movie full of nonsense science, Nexus, Soren's trilithium missile and its effects take the cake. When launched, it shoots into the sky for about 9 movie seconds, and from there apparently gets to the star Viridian in 5 seconds. The star immediately flares and then we see it fading out for about 12 seconds. But here's the problem. Stars are incredibly huge and dense. It takes the average photon something like 100,000 years to get from the core of the sun to its surface, yet a few kilograms of the movie's equivalent of much ridiculed dark matter from Star Trek 2009 manages to kill an entire star virtually instantaneously, which means the effects of this stuff chain reacts through its entire vast mass at light speed or greater. That's not science, that's thick-sliced baloney. Even buying the preposterous notion that the star is magically insta-killed, the dying light from it still has to travel at light speed. Mind you, the light from our sun takes over 8 minutes to get from the surface to Earth. For Viridian's light to get to Viridian 3 in seconds, that planet would have to be 100 times closer to its parent star than we are to ours. How does a habitable Class M planet exist that close to a star? I don't know, but I bet it's pretty toasty. Number 4. What the dickens? During the run of Star Trek The Next Generation, Patrick Stewart began performing his one-man version of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, with the latter really smacking of the inspiration for Picard's family Christmas fantasy in the Nexus. And who's this random woman we see as his wife? Is it someone who got away? Some idealized fantasy character? For his initial Nexus fantasy to be Christmas in the middle years of family life, that'd have to be some of his most prominent fantasy. And if that's the case, why is he dressed in the same uniform he was wearing on Viridian 3? Wouldn't his fantasy of a different life take him out of it? And that fantasy as depicted makes no sense. The script calls for it to be held in a 24th century French house, but when we see it in the film, it's a weird amalgamation of Victorian, Edwardian, and mid-20th century. The girl's gifts are antique-style dolls and stuffed animals, and the younger son gets the 1992 Aliens Space Marines evac fighter from the Kenner's toy line. And notice all the incandescent bulbs which you'd expect to see on a Charlie Brown Christmas tree? Why on earth would Picard imagine such an odd conglomeration of Christmas pasts unless he was a closet Dickens fan or had merely binged one too many Hallmark Christmas specials? Or maybe it was all just dumb pandering to Stewart's interests in A Christmas Carol. Number 3. I Spy with My Little Visor. It's really unbelievable that after being imprisoned, abused by Soren, and stripped of his visor, Geordi just goes back on duty without anyone bothering to scour every nanometer of his sight gizmo? Hell, Geordi himself ought to have been concerned that the visor might have been tampered with. It's not just a pair of fashionable shades after all, it's an Intel nightmare. And speaking of the visor, even choking down the horse pill of an idea that the sabotage would work at all, the writers missed a great opportunity to milk this action for all its potential tension. The moment they realized the Klingons were able to fire through their shields, Geordi should have rotated the shield frequency, and when the Klingons instantly matched that frequency change once or twice, put together what they did to his visor, rip it off, and order someone else to change the frequencies. But too late to save the ship. Number 2. Anytime, anywhere, all at once. Time has no meaning here, so if you leave, you can go anywhere, anytime. So said Echo Guinan in the Nexus. But just how does that work? How can anyone exit the Nexus in places it hasn't been? The only way into it is via the ribbon rupture, but if you just will yourself out, it knows just how, when, and where in what time and space to put you, and how to do it safely? This isn't science fiction. Heck, it's not even science fantasy. It's pure, unadulterated fantasy, complete with magic. And if Picard is really so distraught over the death of his brother and nephew, why not step out before the fire and warn them? Then call up Starfleet and say, hey, there's this dude on the Amargosa station that's got a trilithium star killer and he's working with the Klingons, you might want to deal with that. Instead, Picard jumps back to where he failed before, this time just bringing Kirk with him. Not to mention the wibbly-wobbly timey-wiminess of him appearing where and when he was before entering the Nexus, except where did Picard from the previous go-around go? God, temporal mechanics are dumb. Number 1. Mistakes were made. For all the Nexus's stupidity, the biggest one is that, if you think about it for half a second, it creates a lack of true stakes at the end of the movie. Specifically, since Picard and Kirk can exit at any time, anywhere, there's really no way they can fail unless both of them get killed. I mean, if it looks like they can't stop Soren from launching the missile, all they have to do is let themselves be scooped up by the Nexus, jump back out, and try again. Hell, the first time they arrive, they could just go into hiding, spy on Soren's movements, figure out when he's the most vulnerable, go through the Nexus revolving door, and then do the deed. And if that didn't work, wash, rinse, repeat as needed till Soren fails or goes boom. Did I mention temporal mechanics are dumb? Temporal mechanics are dumb. Widely regarded as the best of the Next Generation cast movies, First Contact has the benefit of a relatively straightforward story. Yeah, it's a bit simplistic, but it's got action, a nice sequence on the hull of the ship, and some good character conflict moments between Picard and Lillian Sloane. It even manages to get in enough fan-pleasing moments without engaging in outright pandering. That's not to say it has no detractors. Its reimagining of TNG's signature adversary, the Borg, was divisive, and many see this as the place where cerebral, diplomatic Picard transmogrifies into the less interesting action movie Picard we'd see more of in the subsequent films. Compared to the films which immediately preceded and followed it, it's not as overflowing with dumb, but that's not to say that it's perfect. So let's fire up the chronometric vortex and travel back to 1996 to see just what kind of dumb we can find in First Contact. With all that out of the way, I'm Bree from TrekCulture, and here are 10 of the dumbest things in Star Trek First Contact. Number 10. Borg car bombs. The Borg ball successfully generates 1.21 gigawatts of chronometric particles to send it back to 1955, or 2063. in order to prevent the titular first contact from occurring, and cause Picard and company to fade away from all their Starfleet class photos. All fine and dandy. So, upon arrival in the past, how did the terrifying Borg go about changing the future? They fire little pew-pews at the planet and cause car bomb-sized explosions. That's it? The big bads of the Milky Way galaxy with technology that can almost instantly adapt to photon torpedoes can't fire a weapon that can take out a small town in one shot? Hell, even assuming the Borg ball is really just a Borg DeLorean time machine with pathetic weapons, they demonstrate that they can beam aboard the Enterprise. So why not beam a drone or 3 down to Big Sky, Montana and assimilate Cochrane and the local yokels? Because that would make sense. Number 9. Let's do the time warp again. Okay, sure. It's believable enough that the Enterprise E can surf the wake of the Borg ball through its wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey chronometric tunnel back to First Contact Week, but when the adventure ends, there's the little matter of returning to the 24th century. Since when does a Federation starship have the ability to do the chronometric particle dance, not only to blow this 21st century popsicle stand, but to get right back to where they started without under or overshooting? This could have been handled in a throwaway line to the effect that the Borgification of the ship included modifications to let the Borg Queen and her minions get back to the future. But no. In the grand tradition of all of Trek, the fantastic new capability is instantly filed away and forgotten. Maybe it's in that same endless warehouse as in the Lost Ark? Number 8. Crusher character assassination. Crusher. Once the captain has made up his mind, the discussion is over. Since when? Star Trek The Next Generation was the show where virtually every other thing that happened resulted in a conference. So how did we get from that to the captain's word is law and we don't question it? Starfleet was right in their lack of confidence in Picard where the Borg are concerned. He is emotionally compromised here, and the subject of command fitness is something that Crusher, of all people, should be raising concern for, big time. The dialogue should be put on trial for character assassination of Beverly Crusher. But, as is with most of the TNG cast outside of Picard and Data, Crusher was crushed down to supporting player status, and lines that ought to have been hers were given to guest character Lily. That's Hollywood, but it's dumb. Number 7. Watch that first step. The first 2 Next Generation movies are full of window dumbness. In Generations, the dome atop the Enterprise D bridge gets shattered despite being 200 meters from the leading edge where all the windows seen are intact. But First Contact appears to have inverted the too easily broken glass paradigm by having Picard demonstrate that what passes for a window on this ship substitutes a force field for glass, or transparent aluminum or whatever. How is something which must be actively powered preferable to the safer alternative of actually having a passive, stable, physical barrier between the crew and the vacuum of space? To be fair, the shooting script describes this set as an umbilical docking port and what Picard opens as a huge circular portal, not a window per se. Perhaps the idea was that this was supposed to be a docking port of the sort we saw travel pods using in the motion picture and The Wrath of Khan. A port of that sort having a force field to keep the air in when the hatches open, sure, I buy that. Whatever the intention, this portal is shaped just like a window seen on the ship's hull. So, taking the movie on its own terms, the windows on the ship are force fields. What's worse, these energetic windows have nothing to do with anything. Why establish something like this if you're not going to use it as a story point? Number 6. Captain's outrageous. Picard's experience being assimilated by the Borg is the stuff of nightmares, and that he's in any way functional in the aftermath is miraculous. Or the stuff of episodic TV where long-term consequences were routinely forgotten for the expediency of getting 26 shows out a year. Still, Picard's cavalier gunning down of a member of his crew in the process of being Borg assimilated is shocking, particularly in light of the fact that he's living proof that it's possible to come back from being plugged into the collective. Is he really so haunted by his experience that he'd rather have been killed than rescued and reclaimed? Sure, maybe sensing the Borg voices has hit him so hard that he's snapped, but if so, there should have been a character rebuilding moment where he realizes how horrible his trauma had made him, and this motivates him to make things right, or make it so. That there's no such moment of realization is, well, you know the drill. Number 5. The Queen Gambit. The original horror of the Borg was that they were an implacable foe that you couldn't communicate or reason with any more than you could communicate with a marauding colony of army ants. This was amended to add the body horror of assimilation. The Borg didn't merely want to consume your technology, but consume you by mutilating your body and stripping you of your mind and individuality, making you another interconnected part of their vast, unholy whole. But this movie undoes that with the invention of the Queen, who, despite her half-hearted claims to the contrary, comes across as a distinct individual who controls the collective. So the terror of the vast impersonal entity gets twisted into an army of mindless zombies given a face and a voice by a Republic serial villain. The choice demonstrates a lack of imagination in order to play things conventionally. It's an especially odd choice given the horror movie vibe of the Borg infestation of the Enterprise, and given that the killers in many horror films are, not unlike the Borg of old, relentless killing machines that you can't converse or even reason with. Number 4. Holodeck bullet time. How dumb is it that the Borg can adapt to phasers and photon torpedoes and gigantic pulses through that navigational deflector, yet in virtually all appearances they're almost always vulnerable to old-fashioned physical assault and material weapons. Be it the Klingon mek'leth that Worf used in the film, or just a good old right cross, the Borg seem to have no defense. Accepting this hitch in their adaptive ability, it makes sense that they'd be vulnerable to physical projectiles. But what's perplexing is that the holodeck can make tangible bullets. What possible reason could there be for an entertainment program to generate potentially lethal projectiles? It kinda just seems like yet another holodeck malfunction waiting to happen. This tremendous liability seems like something that would keep the Starfleet JAG officer busy for forever. And come to think of it, why does Picard even bother with the Dixon Hill holo program in the first place? Why not turn off the safety protocols, have the computer generate a Tommy gun and a bunch of other Picards with the same weapon, wait for the Borg to come through the door and go all Scarface on their cybernetic asses? Okay, I know. It's because the movie needs another set piece. Number 3. Faith in Minions. At the film's climax, once Data overrides the computer lockouts, the Queen orders him to give her direct computer control. You have to assume he does because, being Borg and all networked, she'd know if he hadn't. With such control, instead of the collective causing the ship to immediately lock onto the Phoenix and fire the weapons, or even ram it, she trusts Data to do it, because she's just that good. And when it turns out that her sexy time with him could not overcome his virtue and he deliberately misses, the collective doesn't just immediately adapt to this circumstance and take action itself. Instead, the Queen screams in outrage and leaves Data time to deliver his punchline before rupturing the plasma coolant and dooming them all. If she hadn't been so busy twirling her cybernetic mustache and paying attention instead of needlessly taunting Picard with, "Watch your futures end," then the Borg might have actually won. No wonder they could never defeat the Federation. Dumb Borg. Number 2. It's just a jump to the left and a step to the right. Since this movie's premiere in 1996, a lot has been said of the Borg's plan to finally defeat Earth via an end run back in time to prevent the titular first contact from occurring. Is that really the best strategy? Even from the Borg point of view? Doesn't changing history alter your own? And how can they know that successfully Borgifying Earth hundreds of years in the past is not going to have other serious and potentially negative repercussions that they can't anticipate? Was the time-traveling gambit their plan all along? Or was it a plan B employed only when the brute force approach of the Borg cube muscling its way to Earth failed? And if the Borg can time travel so easily, why don't they do it more often? Anytime you see things go badly, as the song says, and let's do the time warp again, and again, and again, till you win. As I previously mentioned concerning temporal nonsense of the Nexus in Star Trek Generations, temporal mechanics are dumb. Number 1. That's why the lady is a vamp. The Queen as a concept wouldn't be half as terrible had the film not gone the unwelcome extra kilometer of making her an outrageous seductress. An all too common trope of cinema since the silent era is to portray strong females as vamps, short for vampires. They are seductive, amoral creatures who use sex to gain their way, which was regressive even when the film was released in 1996. It's not enough for the face of the Borg to be a woman. No, she must be an overtly sexual creature who employs sins of the flesh to win out over corrupt, innocent, and stalwart men. First Contact so delights in this stereotype that it can't imagine trying not to make the Queen physically attractive, right down to her ridiculous ruby red lips and that outfit. Borg Queen, was that good for you? No, and ultimately not good for Star Trek. And that's the dumbest aspect of this movie, hands down.
Not all the Star Trek movies are gems, to be sure, and putting aside the odd-numbered film curse, there's general, though far from universal, consensus about which films are the worst. For the TOS films, it's possibly Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. For the Next Generation crew, it's a toss-up between Star Trek Insurrection or Star Trek Nemesis. No one sets out to make a lame movie, but the road to Grethor is paved with good intentions. Trek scribe Michael Piller certainly did his best to craft a script actually about something. But his starting point of Joseph Conrad's 1899 novella, Heart of Darkness, quickly ran afoul of both head honcho Rick Berman, the studio, and leading men Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner. In the end, that was too many tails wagging one dog, and Insurrection was the end result. It's a middling film, sure, but it's also chock full of dumb, with story contrivances galore. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, asking you to keep that tongue firmly in cheek as we go through the 10 dumbest things in Star Trek Insurrection. Number 10. Admiral Idiocy. Admiral Dougherty isn't so much a character as a plot device. He's a paper tiger for Picard to punch through. A well-written antagonist would force Picard and the audience to confront the elephant in the room. Is it ethical to leave 600 people blissfully as they are at the cost of helping millions or billions? Do the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or not? But Dougherty is written so blandly as to be a nothing burger, and Picard just speechifies his way past it. The Admiral's also a nitwit. Otherwise, why is he, and presumably the Federation Council he represents, so keen on allowing the Sonar thugs to strip mine this planet's rings right now? Those rings are the source of the apparently unique metaphasic radiation effects, right? So why wouldn't he want to make absolutely certain that the Sonar don't make a finite resource out of a potentially renewable one? And there's a missed opportunity here to illustrate how the desire of short-term gain has long-term consequences. That would have meshed beautifully with the film's underexplored themes. Finally, what does Dougherty mean when he says the planet will be uninhabitable for generations following the Sonar plan? Uninhabitable suggests more than just the Baku can't live there. Does all plant and animal life on the planet not matter? Is the Federation Council okay with exterminating it? Do only the Baku lives matter here? Dougherty be dumb. Number 9. Sophomoric Sonar Society. The Sonar are as intrinsically insipid as the Baku who bore, and certainly bored, them. Considering that the Baku population hovers around 600, it's highly likely that the dissenting group that evolved into the Sonar was considerably smaller in size, otherwise their prior insurrection would have met with success. Consequently, at best, several hundred exiles ventured into space, yet managed to subjugate 2 primitive civilizations. Given their capability to accomplish this feat, what impediment prevents them from reversing course and subjugating their own kin? Baku Joseph flat out says they won't raise a weapon. What's to stop the Sonar? So why this stupid coy plan with Admiral Dougherty? Would the Federation even bother to maintain a claim to the planet if the Sonar just said up front, hey, we're from that planet, our stupid parents have been there 309 years, so you've got zero jurisdiction, buzz off. And since the Feds are so keen for this metaphasic medical malarkey, why don't the Sonar just make them an offer they can't refuse? Tell you what, we'll build the swankiest space hospital you've ever seen, so long as you pull up the occasional starship full of gold-pressed platinum. But the movie pretends that this radiation can make Worf revisit puberty and fix Geordi's eyes in no time, yet it can't help the Sonar without years of exposure? That's narratively dishonest. Number 8. Holoships ahoy! The plan for moving the Baku involved recreating their entire village and its surroundings in the guts of a Federation holoship, which is parked at the bottom of a nearby reservoir. What happened to the water it must have displaced? Did the Baku not notice the downstream flooding? Moreover, it's suggested that the Baku will all be beamed into their illusory environs while asleep and never realise what's happened. But if they're going to be beamed, why does the holoship need to be down on the planet at all? It has a flipping cloaking device which renders it invisible, so why not just leave it in orbit? More preposterous is the action of beaming the wide-awake sonar bridge crew from their ship to the holoship without them realising, and only a flash hinting at what happened. Even assuming you can't feel a transporter or see its effects on others around you whilst beaming, just how and why would Worf and Data have a holo program that perfectly replicates the bridge of a specific alien vessel right down to how lumpy the upholstery is? Talk about your contrivances. And speaking of that holoship, number 7. A whole new world. You go to sleep one night in the village, wake up the next morning on this flying holodeck transported en masse. In a few days, you're relocated on a similar planet without ever realising it. The notion that the bad guys can move the Baku without their knowledge simply doesn't work. Sure, maybe they can recreate a convincing illusion inside the holodeck for the short term, but what about on the destination planet? Think about it. For them to never realise they've been moved is impossible. To fool them, even for a while, this new world must be indistinguishable in countless ways, both subtle and gross. Does it have exactly the same gravity, atmospheric composition and air pressure? Are the plants and mineral concentrations the same? What about the biome, the flora and fauna and fish? Does it smell the same? Do they terraform the target landscape so it matches every minute aspect of the region the Baku have seen or explored in the past 6 centuries? Is the local water table at the same level? Does the planet rotate at the exact same speed so day and night are precisely the same? What about the sky? Is the sun the exact same apparent size and colour as on Baku? Does the night sky look identical right down to the rings? Or is the plan, they won't know we've moved them till it's done, and then who cares? If that's the case, why bother hiding the move at all? The Baku are conceptually dumb, but not dumb enough to fail to notice any of this. It's an oversight as big as in 1968's Planet of the Apes, where the moon and constellations almost immediately ought to have spoiled the twist that it was Earth all along. Number 6. Bullet time with a niche. A big point is made about the Baku knowing how to exist in a moment, to slow down their perception of time. Anish demonstrates this to Picard, how her perception is perceptible to him as a contrivance, but later he uses it to keep her alive when she's injured and close to death. Except, how? Your perception of time isn't the actual passage of time. So when Picard goes all bullet time with Anish while waiting for help, what exactly happens? Mindfulness, meditation and yoga may allow someone to slow down their metabolism, respiration, etc. And maybe something like that could buy you some extra moments when you're slipping away. But is that what's happening? Anish flat out says of this ability, nothing more complicated than perception. You explore the universe. We have discovered that a single moment in time can be a universe in itself, full of powerful forces. Most people aren't aware enough of the now to even notice. That's lovely sounding nonsense. Like so much else in this movie, it's vague woo which serves a scene but doesn't serve the story. Another pointless throwaway in a script teeming with them. Number 5. Firming up. The portrayal of the Fountain of Youth effects on the Enterprise crew are a mixed bag. Picard getting his mambo on is harmless. Geordi gaining natural eyesight is touching, even if it makes little logical sense. As for the rest, well, the effects are more laughable than fun or funny. Worf reverts to puberty and gets a ginormous pimple. Crusher and Troy talk about their breasts. Data de-ages into a fully functional battery-powered adult toy. Oh wait, no he doesn't. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, in fairness, that's about as adolescent as other examples. Troy suddenly employing the word boobs is so out of place as to be nothing but cringe. Having Data repeated to Worf adds insult to injury. At that time, Trek's dialogue remained grounded in the more formal speech patterns that prevailed when the original Star Trek hit the airwaves, so the language doesn't feel organic to the characters. Boobs is as out of place as fart would be. Marina Sirtis might say it, Troy not so much. Star Trek would eventually engage in F-bombardment, so perhaps we should consider ourselves lucky that this is the worst we got. Imagine if we had to hear Troy expound on Riker's junk firming up. The horror. Number 4. Putting the man in manual steering. Star Trek is almost universally laughable when it attempts to be cool. Nothing in Insurrection exemplifies this more than Riker calling for the manual steering column. This apparatus is a pop-up pillar that, at a glance, is downright phallic. With its tapered apex, it erupts from the floor like a tumescent jack-in-the-box and spits up a joystick. That joystick is an off-the-shelf Gravis Blackhawk that many computer gamers in the audience would, and did, instantly recognise. A basic joystick that only gives you yaw and pitch and roll, which is fine for an aeroplane but not so good for a spacecraft. And where are the throttles? Where are the readouts? It should have been a futuristic take on a submarine or aircraft control yoke, or something better suited to steering a starship than playing Microsoft Flight Simulator. A little more effort could have yielded some audience excitement. Instead, the stick elicited laughs and groans. Number 3. Roafo and co. get Brazilians. Trek's never been a franchise for understatement. Why be subtle when you can go all caps, right? So, of course, the morally decayed Sona were portrayed as literally rotting, so much so that they're constantly undergoing plastic surgery to give themselves a lift. Watching Roafu go all rubber-faced is unintentionally hilarious because it's a woefully unoriginal bald-faced swipe from Terry Gilliam's dystopian farce Brazil from 1985, wherein status-hungry socialite Ida Lowry, played by Catherine Helmond, her addiction to facelifts puts the plastic in plastic surgery, as her face is pulled and stretched as if composed of silly putty. When Admiral Dougherty gets his terminal facelift, via some, surely of the time, CGI, all I could think of was the bandage-wrapped Mrs. Lowry. My complication had a little complication. Number 2. Gilligan's Insurrection. Expecting continuity between The Next Generation and its movie follow-ups is perhaps a fool's errand, but Data's negative buoyancy in this movie lines up with the TNG episode. In Descent Part 2, it said that Data once tried to swim, sank straight to the bottom, and had to walk over a kilometre to get to land. And it took almost 2 weeks to get the water out of his servos. This effectively made him the XR-1000 robot from Gilligan's Island, Season 2, Episode 21, Gilligan's Living Doll to be exact, which was not buoyant and walked to the ocean floor all the way back to Hawaii. Skipper! Insurrection twice demonstrates Data isn't buoyant. First, he walks into the lake and doesn't float. Later, when Anij is in danger of drowning, Picard and Data jump into the lake and only Picard stays at the surface. Data vanishes into the depths. All fine and good, but then he rises from the water to his shoulders and delivers the line, "In the event of a water landing, I have been designed to serve as a flotation device," at which point he rises further so the water is at waist level. It was dumb enough to be parodied by Futurama, Season 2, Episode 16, The Deep South, where Bender says, "In the event of an emergency, my ass can be used as a flotation device." This suggests below-the-belt features of Data's anatomy inflating that I'd just as soon not picture. Number 1. Start of Darkness. As noted in the introduction, Insurrection stemmed from a premise that writer Michael Piller described as Heart of Lightness. He conceived of a structure informed by Heart of Darkness, the text that inspired, of course, as well, 1979's Apocalypse Now, but that the trip up the river would lead Picard and his crew on a very different kind of adventure. Heart of Darkness is a controversial work for many reasons, but portrays the destructive and dehumanizing impacts of colonization on the colonized and the psychological toll it takes on the colonizers. It's a powerful concept, and a spotlight shone on the Federation and Starfleet and what it takes to get them to violate their ideals sounds like a great story. But the idea ran into problems almost immediately. Rick Berman and others balked at the notion that the Federation would permit what Piller suggested. To ensure neither the Federation nor Starfleet was portrayed negatively, the story introduced disposable bad guys and one bad apple admiral. This gradual dilution robbed the story of its entire point. This was just the beginning, and the decisions made to fix the script's various perceived defects and to make the stars happy resulted in a patchwork of mismatched elements that failed to satisfy a lot of audiences. Insurrection ably illustrates the proverb, "A camel is a horse designed by a committee." Creativity by committee, my friends, is dumb. Commonly criticised for being little more than an inflated 2-part TV episode, Star Trek Insurrection failed to excite critics or make a dent at the box office. Given this, fans could be forgiven for hoping for the best when it was announced that Oscar-nominated editor-turned-director Stuart Baird was going to helm the next film from a script by one of the Oscar-nominated writers of Ridley Scott's Gladiator, John Logan. Sadly for audiences in the franchise, the result was Star Trek Nemesis. A bit of a dud with uninspired direction and a script barely better than fanfiction. The film was met with a series low at the box office and a collective shrug from most critics.
As a result, Star Trek, once a crown jewel of Paramount, would disappear from movie theatres for 7 years. But just what was wrong with the script? Beyond its poor characterization, unfocused plot, ham-fisted twins theme, and wall-to-wall illogic, you guessed it, or in fairness the title of this video gave it away, it is one of the dumbest Star Trek movies ever. How dumb? Shall we count the ways? I'm Sean Frederick for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 dumbest things in Star Trek Nemesis. Number 10. Sensitive Data. Data's brother, B4, claims to have no memories of his life before he was on the planet where the Enterprise found him. To help B4 realise his potential, Data chooses to copy his memory engrams into him. He does this with Picard's blessing, even as LaForge warns that B4 would have all of Data's memories as well, adding, "Maybe he's not supposed to be like you, Data. Maybe he's supposed to be exactly the way he is." Data's rationalisation, "That might be so, but I believe he should have the opportunity to explore his potential," is troubling. While that unilateral decision is questionable enough, what's dumb is that both Data and Picard are okay with this memory copy at all. Data's memories include personal interactions and information about his friends and colleagues that they might not consent to share, and decades of memories about his Starfleet service, including metric tons of sensitive data about Starfleet, starships, and missions covert and otherwise. How's that a good idea? And how could anyone think it was appropriate? And sure enough, B4 accesses the ship's computers to try and get information to assist in Shinzon's evil plans. Could he have done this had not Picard approved this literal data dump? LaForge says, "I still can't believe the captain went along with the memory download." Neither can we, Geordie. Neither can we. Number 9. Violations. Related to Shinzon's dawdling rather than play coy to make sure Picard doesn't smell a womp rat, wrong franchise, and raise shields or warp away, he mentally assaults Troy. Okay, sure, he's damaged goods in every way imaginable, but how does he think this is a good idea? Shinzon's simultaneously trying to woo Picard and mentally violating one of his key aides. Does he think Picard's not going to find out about this? He's smart enough to stage this whole elaborate coup, and yet stupid enough to risk it all because he finally sees a woman without pointed ears and a bowl cut. And assuming he's really that stupid, what about his Riemann Viceroy, the one who enables the attack? Where's the, "Yo, Praetor, this is a really bad idea. It's gonna show our hand and risk everything. Show some impulse control for a few minutes, at least till, we've grabbed Picard and done the Nosferatu thing and bled him dry." And it could have been worse. As script, the violation happened just before Picard's dinner with Shinzon, and was followed by a second attack, filmed but deleted, right after the dinner. Number 8. Scorpion silliness. When Picard and Data steal one of the Scorpion-class attack flyers from the Scimitar hangar, just how does Picard think that the route through the ship will take them to the one room with the big window perfect for escaping? Data's been snooping around the Scimitar playing B4, so sure, maybe he's learned the layout. But there's nothing in the film to suggest he's backseat driving. When the Enterprise rams into the Scimitar later, it's obvious the hangar is lower on the ship than the window through which the Scorpion escaped. Did it fly up some grand staircase we missed, or did it just take some giant turbolift? Finally, about the Scorpion flyers, they're yet another example of Trek movies introducing something for expediency, but which factors into the story not one whit. You know what would have been a surprise? Introducing these earlier in the story, maybe escorting the Enterprise into orbit, so when Picard and Data find themselves desperate for a way off the ship, have them surprise us by absconding with one and flying through the ship to a place they can get out. Or, hey, have Data use it later to get back onto the Scimitar. Set up and pay off is something the TNG movies didn't excel at. Number 7. Targeted transporters. So, just how is it that the Remans were able to lock onto and beam Picard over to their ship? It's not like he's on the bridge and yapping with them on the view screen or wearing a homing beacon. He's talking to Troy in sickbay when abducted, and there's no indication the Viceroy is intruding into her mind to get a bearing. Is it just that easy to pinpoint a specific human on the Enterprise? Does the Scimitar possess sensors that can differentiate individuals on another ship based on DNA or something? If so, how does the Enterprise crew not detect such invasion snooping? And how does this single-use transporter used to save Picard's bacon at the climax know to deposit Picard on the Enterprise bridge in a spot clear of any obstructions or passing crew? These movies are full of this stuff, where events happen because they're convenient and capabilities are established in one scene and immediately forgotten in another. Dum-da-dum-dum-dum. Number 6. The Earth-centric universe. Shinzon's very existence, his ticking down life clock, he might as well have had a red crystal in his palm a la Logan's Run, and all the pain and suffering he's endured was the doing of the Romulans. So once he stages his coup, seizes power, and commands the baddest battle wagon around with its planet-killing Medusa radiation, what does he reveal his master plan to be? Attack Earth. Kill every living thing on it. Why is it always Earth? The Star Trek movies became obsessed with it. Earth is directly endangered in the motion picture The Voyage Home, First Contact, and Star Trek 2009. Sure, V'ger originated from Earth. The Whale probe is looking for some missing humpbacks, and the Borg are attempting a redo of their first attempt on Earth. But Shinzon? What's his motivation? The Romulans wrecked his life and practically ensured his death. But hey, who needs revenge on them when he can kill the planetary home of his unwitting DNA donor? Yes, he's this dumb movie's dumb villain with dumb motivations. Number 5. Once more into the Briar Patch. Okay, sure, admittedly the Briar Patch per se was in the previous movie. But here we have yet another mandatory space anomaly, a nebula by any other name, smells just as cliche. This one's a glowing green cloud thingus called the Basin Rift, through which all long-range comms don't work, but short-range comms are fine, so all the local ships can yap with one another. And get this, the Enterprise, with the crew's knowledge that Shinzon's undetectable ship is likely right on their arse, flies directly into the damned thing. Did no one look for hazards en route? Even Data doesn't think to caution against this, only realising the data at the moment they first have a comm flicker. Why would the Starfleet ships assemble to support the Enterprise on the far side of this thing, and just sit there as shown on the chart? Why wouldn't they aim for a position where they could see beyond it, and have the Enterprise bear towards the same spot, so there'd be no chance of comm signal disruption? And why is it only when they enter the damned thing does this vulnerability conveniently come up? Number 4. Crash test dummy Shinzon. Picard's decision to ram the Enterprise into the Scimitar only works because this is modern Star Trek, where ships always sit nose to nose despite transporters having ranges of tens of thousands of kilometers. Upon seeing what Picard is doing, why does the ever-dawdling Shinzon order, and much too late, "Hard to port"? Only long after the crash does he have the presence of mind to order "Divert all power to engines, full reverse." If he'd had the presence of mind to order full reverse the moment the Enterprise started its very slow ramming maneuver, it'd at least have diminished the impact force, and maybe provided an opportunity for some evasive action. Or, hey, what about launching all those damn Scorpion flyers and letting them fly and damage the Enterprise's impulse engines? Oh wait, they only exist so Picard can steal one. Number 3. The nuke on the bridge. So, let's see, this ginormous scimitar badass ship is possessed of all sorts of overly complicated rotating and unfurling emitters and layered bat wings for releasing this deadly Thalaron radiation. But the Tootsie Roll center of this space plutonium Tootsie Pop is in a compartment just off the bridge. Just a note for myself, clearly that was an odd thing for me to say, not having come from America. Tootsie Pop, I'm assuming is some sort of American thing. Not only is a critical doohickey of this turns everyone into pumice Medusa radiation within spitting distance of everyone in the main control room, but the most important dudes on the ship, like, I don't know, Praetor Shinzon, what possible sense does this make? Why is it anywhere near there instead of buried at the core of the ship surrounded by shielding? Looking at the device, is there even a force field? As far as we can see, it's unshielded by transparent aluminum, a see-through shower curtain, or even a peekaboo 90. Shinzon's knife gets destroyed in it, but was that a shield or the energy itself? An early draft of the script featured a different yet equally dumb premise, that multiple warp cores passed through the bridge. That's as logical as a nuclear reactor just off the bridge of a modern supercarrier. Number 2. Action Picard. After Picard is captured, he and Data fight to escape the Scimitar, with Picard doing most of the shooting. Again, at the climax, the script contrives to make Jean-Luc beam to the Scimitar, alone, an Exercitus Unius, a one-man army. Surprise, or rather, no surprise. You didn't really think that the dune buggy scene fulfilled the Action Picard quotient for this film, did you? Of course not. Since Sir Patrick Stewart's name is at the top of the cast list, Jean-Luc has to go in all guns blazing. It's preposterous. A point is made that Remans have the reputation for being formidable warriors, used as assault troops in the most violent encounters. With that established, you'd expect them to be tough opponents, but Action Picard just mows them down on their own home turf. Furthermore, by the end, Picard is acting as irresponsibly as Shinzon. He lets it get personal when the lives of his entire crew are on the line, refusing to let Data go in his place. Data, who's stronger, indefatigable, and knows the layout of the enemy ship, is more likely to succeed than anyone else. Action Picard is dumb. He should be drummed out of the service, or at least the dismal box office ensured he'd not appear in another movie. Number 1. Dumbway Trip. When Data first rescues Picard to prevent him from being bled out by Shinzon's minions, he produces a heretofore unseen rabbit out of his hat, an itsy-bitsy teeny-weeny prototype emergency transport unit capable of beaming one person. It's not used then, but at the end of the film, he slaps this onto Picard and sends him back to the Enterprise where he gets himself blown up real good. Why does the Enterprise have such a prototype? And why is it just one? Is Geordi just so good that he invented something so useful, yet Starfleet's R&D never came up with such a thing? It's just another tech thing invented to conveniently allow a specific story beat. The book The Physics of Star Trek posited that the energy necessary to convert a light adult human being into energy would be the equivalent to 100 1-megaton hydrogen bombs. Sure, we see phasers do this, but those weapons only have to do the disassembly, not project that energy stream to another place along with all the information for reassembling it, and, actually reassemble it. When Picard arrives on the Enterprise bridge, the gizmo is still stuck to his shirt, which means it beamed itself. How? Does it turn itself into energy, and while in an energy state still functions to put both itself and Picard back together? It sure wasn't the Enterprise transporters doing the reassembly, as Geordi said they went down the moment after he beamed Picard to the scimitar. The transporter has always been magic, but this is beyond the pale, even for it. Despite being sold as an action-adventure show, Star Trek's always had something of a rep for putting story before action. So much so that it's often and accurately characterised as talky. Even as video compositing and CGI saw the cost of visual effects drop, the Trek franchise largely avoided the influence of Star Wars to go big on the action at a cost to character and theme. That changed when director J.J. Abrams rebooted the original as a big-budget blockbuster in 2009 and dialed the action-adventure quotient to Lucasfilm levels. The reaction? Well, no one can hate on a franchise like its own devotees, and many were the fans that decried this new take in a not my Star Trek fashion and accused it of dumbing down their favourite sci-fi enterprise. Sure, there's plenty that's silly, convenient and coincidental, and some will never forgive the lens flares or the brewery. But those nitpicks aside, what's truly dumb in the Kelvin timeline? Let's implode some red matter and make a portal back to 2009 and find out. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 dumbest things in Star Trek 2009. Number 10. Red matter matters. Despite fan complaints, the so-called red matter is no more preposterous than a lot of other unobtainium substances postulated and employed in various Treks, be it star-killing trilithium from Star Trek Generations, or the anything Muppet Genesis Wave from Star Treks 2 and 3, to name but two examples. If we're being honest, it's the dumb name that fans bristle at. If it had been called quantum gravitic sixrillium, or some other technobabble words pulled out of somebody's aft, nobody would have blinked. But calling it red matter, somehow that was the bridge too far. Silly name aside, if the red matter can form a black hole capable of hoovering up a supernova, just how is it supposed to be deployed? Some supernovae leaving nothing where the star was, and others leave various types of collapsed stars at their centres. Can Spock Prime set it off in the hollow centre of where the star had been? How the hell do you drill into a neutron star? If, before the star blows up, was he supposed to get into the star's core? If not, why did the Narada have to drill to the centre of Vulcan and the Earth to set it off? Did anyone think this through? I think we know the answer to that. Number 9. Numbskull Nero. Eric Bana's performance as Nutball Nero transcends the paper-thin character seen on screen. One can rationalise any idiocy of Nero's on the fact he's not operating on all thrusters on account of his grief. Indeed, unused bits from the shooting script make it plain this is the case, but not enough of this is in the finished film for it to land. Even accepting that Nero is determined to nuke the Federation for failing to save his home planet and family in the future, being that he's now in the past, before this tragedy he really ought to make it beeline for his home and use Prime Spock's red matter to prevent the supernova that threatens Romulus, because why even take the risk that his ship might be stopped or damaged whilst imploding Federation planets? There'd be plenty of time for vaguely motivated genocide afterwards. What's especially stupid is that he spares the Enterprise so young Spock can watch Vulcan die, but he could just as well have insisted Spock come over with Pike and let him watch the planet's destruction from there, or just dump him on Delta Vega with Spock Prime and let them deal with that on top of their misery. Either way, he should have nuked the Enterprise, as it's the only thing that could warn Starfleet about him. But nah, not only is Nero nuts, he's as dumb as a box of rocks. Number 8. A simple mining vessel. It's not unbelievable that the Narada's future tech makes it nearly invincible to the weapons of a century earlier. I mean, imagine the cannons of an early 19th century warship trying to punch through the steel hulls of a 20th century seagoing ship. But the truly dumb thing is its firepower. The Narada reportedly destroyed 47 Klingon warbirds in a single go. Note that we witness at least 6 fragmenting torpedoes hit the Kelvin, and it doesn't completely come apart. One assumes decades newer ships like the Task Force with the Enterprise must be at least as tough. So, how many such torpedo hits does it require to take down 47 warbirds and 5 starships? 300? 400? The point, Nero says, in my time, where I come from, this is a simple mining vessel. So why the hell does it possess such incredible firepower, tie-ins aside, and the tactical weapons to use it? Is space piracy so bad in the 24th century, Romulan space, that miners require such weapons? Perhaps this would have been believable if the fragmenting torpedoes were identified as asteroid-shredding mining tools that Nero employs as weapons against his comparatively antiquated foes, except that these torpedoes go through starship shields as if they weren't there, which suggests they're weapons. Why is a simple mining vessel armed to the teeth? Because it's a summer blockbuster. Pew pew, dum dum! Number 7. Starships annihilated in seconds. Given that the Narada is demonstrated to have inexplicable weapons, there's still the question of rate of fire. How believable is it that it's capable of targeting and annihilating multiple starships in literally seconds? Because that's what happens. At least 4 starships are seen warping off more or less simultaneously for Vulcan, script says 5, while the Enterprise lagged behind because the new helmsman Sulu forgot to release the parking brake. It takes less than a minute for this hiccup to be resolved, and the hero ship is off like a shot. This brand new Enterprise is described as being the flagship. That Star Trek doesn't grok what constitutes a flagship is a gripe for another article. So it's unlikely to be significantly slower than the rest of the task force. As such, she's at best a minute or so behind her sister ships, yet she arrives over Vulcan amidst the wreckage of them. So how is this possible? Did Nero manage to open fire the instant those ships came out of warp? When Nero goes all "fire everything" at the film's climax, the Narada launches a total of 25 torpedoes, then stops, which suggests this is the most it can fire without reloading. Maybe that's enough to shred a task force of 5 starships in a minute, but what about those aforementioned 47 warbirds? Or did the Klingons just hang around while the Narada reloaded, despite seeing their weapons were useless? Number 6. Safety last. What is it with action-adventure movies and bottomless pits? In the old days, a cliched danger was quicksand. Nowadays, it's gigantic plunges into the abyss. Past cinematics treks guilty of this were Star Trek III and Kruge's drop to the Genesis planet, and Nemesis with its inexplicable high dive from the lowermost decks of the Enterprise E. But those are nothing compared to the ultra-unsafe workplace that is the Narada, the interior of which takes its safety cues from that galaxy far, far away in Star Wars, where the only guardrail seems to be the Force. The Narada's guts are a nightmare of pointy hazards, wet surfaces, pointlessly staggered walkways, and watch-your-step drops, with nary a guardrail to be seen. One must assume there's no Romulan equivalent of the HSE or OSHA, the Health and Safety Executive, in Britain, or the Occupational Safety and Health Administration in the US. I guess Romulans and their martial, if we are the stronger mentality, must figure it weeds out the weaklings. Darwin Awards to everyone, not as nimble as a mountain goat. Number 5. Burning to the centre of the Earth. With apologies to Jules Verne, who penned his voyages extraordinaire long before we had technologies to peek through solid rock and glean an understanding of the Earth's guts, the Narada's drilling platform makes no sense. Why the need for it to lower down into the breathable atmosphere? Does anyone realise how far that is from even a low orbit? Is the Narada's ginormous size simply so that it can hold the preposterous cable necessary to bridge such a distance? That aside, you can't drill a stable hole to the centre because the Earth isn't made of solid rock, as any active volcano demonstrates. Hell, even familiar materials behave differently under the intense pressures found deep inside a planet like Earth. Molten iron nickel, anyone? That hole is going to constantly cave in and fill any gap made by frickin' lasers or phasers or whatever the silly drill beam is. This pressure problem would exist on Vulcan as well, even if it's older and cold to its core. The only way this works is if, in addition to its flaming drill beam, the Narada is constantly projecting an immensely powerful cylindrical force field down the thousands of kilometers deep hole to hold it open and allow the red matter to hit bottom. But since the hole remains gaping even after Kirk and Sulu decommission the drill, this clearly ain't the case. Number 4. Moronic marooning. Nothing about or what happens on Delta Vega makes sense. It's habitable but apparently uninhabited, despite being within Mark 1 eyeball viewing distance of Vulcan. There's a Starfleet outpost there, but the communications-damaged Enterprise doesn't pull up and try calling via communicators to determine if the outpost has any capability of contact to, well, speak to anyone who could get a warning to Starfleet. Kirk's marooned to the outpost via a pod that can't land anywhere near it. Kirk has a communicator, but is never shown trying to call for assistance, and Scotty and Keenser both are clueless that the planet next door has vanished. Just why doesn't the outpost have subspace radio? Or did it get its phone service from formerly nearby Vulcan? Guess it's time to switch carriers. And did Nero drop Prime Spock within walking distance of the outpost so he could live with the memory of Vulcan's destruction rather than freezing to death or being eaten by the local fauna, as Kirk nearly was? And how on Hoth did Spock get that wooden torch? Finally, is Lieutenant Spock a pirate captain? Marooning was usually punishment for mutineers and effectively a death sentence. Back in the OG series, Kirk marooned Gary Mitchell because Mitchell was a growing and uncontrollable threat to the ship, and there was no way to contain him. But Cadet Kirk? Spock hangs a lantern on his decision to maroon Kirk by saying he would probably escape a brig cell. So how about sending someone to the surface via shuttlecraft with Kirk in tow while the Enterprise warps away? Delta Vega is the Delta of dumb. Number 3. The bogus supernova. First things first. Many websites and wikis describe the star that destroyed Romulus as the Hobus supernova, but that stems from a 4-issue comic book tie-in titled Countdown, and is neither in the shooting script nor the finished film. In short, Hobus is bogus. All Spock Prime tells Kirk is that in the future a star will explode and threaten to destroy the galaxy. Yeah, about that. Supernovae are a big deal, emphasis on big, but even the biggest supergiant stars only have so much mass and energy to throw around when they go kaboom, all of which becomes more diffuse the farther it gets from the source. Such an explosion could affect planets within a few hundred light years at most, many years or centuries later, since what a supernova flings out is limited by the speed of light. And since our galaxy is estimated to be 100,000 light years across, no way, no how, does a single supernova threaten the entirety. Even if this event threatened the civilizations of the known galaxy, precision-minded Spock Prime could never characterize it as a threat to the galaxy. He'd calculate the number of endangered worlds to 3 decimal places. Hyperbole is illogical and dumb. Anyway, while Spock Prime used the red matter to successfully create a black hole to hoover up the supernova, the reality is you can't put smoke back in a bottle. Even a black hole can't claw back the radiation released, which has zoomed off at light speed and ain't making a U-turn. No undo there. The movie doesn't identify the star that went supernova as Romulus' son. Star Trek Picard did, but that's another matter. And it seems likely, given the visuals, if so, the only way Spock could have saved the planet is to red matter the star before it could explode and cook Romulus with radiation. That would leave the planet with no sun and no heat, but time to rescue the population, assuming the Romulans have lots of power to stay warm, keep the lights on, and sufficient food and reserves, or being delivered. Math fun, a fleet of 1,000 ships, each one capable of moving 10,000 people per trip, and each round trip taking 1 week, would require 11.5 years to evacuate 6 billion people. Number 2. Hitting a bullet with a smaller bullet. Transporters have always been magic passed off as science, so the concept of transwarp beaming is really no more preposterous than beaming at all. What's dumb about the transwarp beaming in this movie is exactly what Scotty describes, but Spock waves it away, trying to hit a bullet with a smaller bullet whilst wearing a blindfold riding a horse. Considering that they're aiming at a moving target that they have zilch data about, other than where it's heading, the Laurentian system, and the warp 3 velocity Spock ordered before throwing Kirk overboard, there's zero indication they know exactly when the Enterprise went to warp, whether it has changed velocity, or if a young Spock changed his mind about his destination. If the Delta Vega outpost sensors could detect the ship in warp, then you might buy it. But Swiss Army knife Spock Prime just pulls some numbers out of his Vulcan arse and it works. Can this get any dumber? Of course it can! If you transwarp beaming, why not send Kirk and Scotty to the Enterprise instead of to another Federation member planet and write to Starfleet Command ahead of Narada's arrival? Or hey, send Kirk to the Enterprise and Scotty to Starfleet Command, thus covering both bases. The real world reason is to contrive to get the OG crew all aboard the Enterprise. And that'd all be fine and good if the script did it in a way that was sensible, not stupid. Number 1. Captaining Kirk. The role of the ship's captain confuses a lot of people on Trek, and in fandom who don't all realise that the captain can mean 2 things. It's a rank, like Commander or Admiral, and it separately refers to the job being the commanding officer on a ship. This is why McCoy could accurately say Commander Spock was the captain in the Tholian Web, because Kirk had been declared dead. Spock doesn't have to hold the rank of captain to be the captain of the ship. But that doesn't mean just anyone can command a ship, emergency situations aside. Being the captain requires knowing everything about how the ship works, and there's no way even a brainiac Kirk, who can whiz through Starfleet Academy in 3 years, is going to have both the knowledge and practical experience to command a top-of-the-line, state-of-the-art starship, no matter that he's the hero. Starfleet might leave him in provisional command for PR purposes, wait for the public eye to shift, then shuffle him off to a less prestigious command to really earn his stripes. But the movie is bound and determined to leave Kirk in that chair by the closing credits, no matter how nonsensical that decision is.
Star Trek Into Darkness, released in 2013, generated significant anticipation among fans and the general audience alike. Following the box office and critical success of the 2009 reboot directed by J.J. Abrams, expectations were high for the sequel. The first film had not only introduced the classic Star Trek characters to a new generation, but had also revitalised interest in the franchise, making the prospect of a follow-up particularly exciting. The return of the main cast, including Chris Pine as Captain Kirk and Zachary Quinto as Spock, played a significant role in building the anticipation. The chemistry and performances of the ensemble cast in the first film had been well received, and audiences were eager to see them in the sequel. One factor contributing to the anticipation was the mystery surrounding the film's plot. Speculation ran rampant that the film's antagonist would be Khan Noonien Singh, best known for the fan and critic favourite Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. This was vociferously denied, but few were surprised when nominal villain John Harrison, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, was revealed to be Khan. The film received many good reviews, but mixed audience responses. For every excellent choice, there was an inexplicable one. The resulting film was, by turns, smart and stupid. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 dumbest things in Star Trek Into Darkness. Number 10. Kirk's Prime Directive violation. The film's opening is fun and plays like an OTT spoof of an original series running and jumping action sequence. It puts a spotlight on 5 of the 7 leads, is dynamic and exciting, but it's as smart as a bag of bricks. And that's not referring to the starship playing Yellow Submarine. We'll get to that. First, why are they doing this in broad daylight? Did they happen to find the volcano and the threatened natives just before the imminent cataclysm? Or does this planet have really long days that prevents waiting till night to pull this stunt, when the ship would be perhaps less visible? Or maybe the natives' night vision is that good? Second, what was Kirk leading the natives on a merry chase supposed to accomplish? Was he deliberately luring them as far away as possible from the volcano because he saw the script called for their temple whatever to be obliterated by raining magma before Spock could drop his super ice cube? Must be, because otherwise keeping the locals indoors would better prevent them from seeing the shuttle or potentially the Enterprise. Finally, how did Kirk not know about the riding animal Bones had rounded up? Wasn't that part of the plan? Or was Bones showing some initiative and Kirk boofed it? And speaking of the ship's doctor, what's he doing there? Granted, on the OG he was often on landing parties for no good reason, but is the chief surgeon the best man to help lure an angry mob to a cliff? Number 9. War. What is it good for? Admiral Robocop, Marcus's plan is a mess. On one hand, he says all-out war with the Klingons is inevitable, and so he dreams of a militarized Starfleet with which to preemptively start and end the conflict. But how, exactly? Okay, sure, he had Khan develop the new long-range and supposedly untraceable photon torpedoes, and he's got the big bad starship Vengeance, a stupid name, who's he getting vengeance on? But think about it, as super-duper powerful as that one Black Ops Black Starship is, it's one ship. It can't be everywhere at once. Despite its barely glimpsed remote weapons pods, and wars are rarely fought on a single front. Why start the war now instead of waiting until he can build more Vengeances? Was he so dependent on Khan that the loss of him ruined his long game? Or does he worry that Khan will reveal his plans? The film comments on the United States' response to the 9/11 attacks and how easy it is to respond to terrorism in ways that lead into darkness, where ethics become an inconvenience, but sadly, the script only pays lip service to these themes without really delving into them, or even taking the time to think through the logical implications. That's the sort of stupid that undermines story logic and blunts the story's allegorical aims. Number 8. The 72 popsicles. Khan says the new torpedoes are of his design, so it makes sense he'd engineer them with alternative purposes in mind, but stuffing his 72 frozen compatriots into them to smuggle them where? Since Admiral Marcus is using these popsicled peeps to compel Khan to do his bidding, Why is he stupid enough to allow the genetic Superman the sort of access that would let him stuff torpedoes with cryotubes? Minus hands-on access, Khan would have to trick or force someone to load the torps for him, but there's no evidence of that. He may be a wily coyote super genius and hack a computer to trick those with access to his people into shipping them somewhere, but wouldn't anyone question loading cryotubes into torpedo components? Or is this all being done by robots like some 23rd century Amazon fulfillment warehouse? The movie could have made a satirical barb about black projects and black boxes and need to know that Khan exploited, but the script isn't anywhere near that smart. Even sillier, Carol Marcus says the fuel containers were removed from the torpedo and retrofitted to hide the cryotubes. This suggests there's little to no fuel in the containers. So just how did her daddy Marcus expect the torpedoes to get from the edge of the neutral zone to their target? Nonsense, all of it. Number 7. The Troublesome Tribble. Khan's fan-dubbed Magic Blood actually isn't any more dumb than the other medical nonsense thrown around in Trek and conveniently forgotten. Omicron CT spores? Kyranoid fuel telekinesis? The issue with the blood is the rather unscientific way Bones McCoy tests it. The trouble's dead. I'm injecting Khan's platelets into the deceased tissue of a necrotic host. Khan's cells regenerate like nothing I've ever seen, and I want to know why. I want to know why he thinks he'll learn anything by injecting them into a who-knows-how-long dead corpse with no active circulatory system. Platelets aid in healing by forming blood clots to stop bleeding, releasing growth factors that promote tissue repair, and participating in the inflammatory response at the site of injury. But they don't have a direct effect on dead tissue. The only way this works is if the Tribble is freshly dead, and Bones uses some contraptions to artificially keep it alive until the power platelets work their magic. Some have questioned why Bones needs Khan to save Kirk when he has the other 72 Popsicle Super Friends at hand, but at least the script sets that up when Bones explains that trying to revive one without the proper sequencing could kill them because the cryotube tech is so ancient that it's beyond him. But that's undermined by this. Get me a cryotube now! Whose? One of the guys you daren't thaw? Number 6. Dumb Silent, Dumb Deep. When we first saw the colossal Kelvin timeline Enterprise rising from the sea, it brought to mind Kirk's reaction to the refit ship from Gene Roddenberry's novelization of Star Trek, the motion picture. Kirk searched for some phrase, some description that expressed what he was feeling. Was she like a lovely woman? No. At this moment, she was more than that to him. A fable? A myth come alive? Yes, that was it. She was as Aphrodite must have been when Zeus first raised her up from the sea, naked and shockingly beautiful. Starship porn indeed. Clumsy Rodden writing aside, it makes no sense for the Enterprise to park underwater. How long has it been down there? Did the shuttle launch from under the sea like the Seaview's FS-1 flying sub? Hey, if starships are submersible, then the next TV series could be Voyager to the bottom of the sea. If the ship needed to be nearby but unseen,
Why didn't they just phaser the side of the volcano and blow a lot of dust into the air to obscure the ship?
a dozen reasons could have been invented to rationalise the starship playing Red October, like it could have been using phasers at point-blank range to drill holes into the volcano's undersea route to vent lava into the sea to relieve pressure, buying time for Spock to forge his solution. But no. As happens too often in these films, the Enterprise is underwater just because it looks cool. Number 5. Stone Cold Fusion. Since Star Trek's science has routinely been magic in a technobabble wrapper, Spock having a gizmo to instantly transmogrify molten lava into volcanic basalt and scoria is on brand. Though, since cold is the absence of heat, one wonders where all that heat energy was sent, maybe to Uhura's anger at Spock? As with the prior film's red matter, what's stupid is the name. Cold fusion refers to a hypothetical process whereby atoms fuse at room temperature and release energy. For 35 years, every claim for such a thing has been irreproducible, and the term itself is synonymous with junk science. To be charitable, maybe that's the point. After all, the planet in the opening sequence bears the moniker of the pseudo-science and conspiracy theory postulated planet Nibiru. Is the film hanging lanterns on the fact that Trek's science is junk science? Funny if intentional, but if that's the case, the movie doesn't let us in on the joke. Or perhaps the writers merely thought, hey, lava's hot and cold is the opposite, so if they fuse it solid, cold fusion. I'm going to pretend it was the former. Number 4. Location. Like its predecessor, the script for Into Darkness has no sense of spatial geography, and its depiction of warp travel makes the universe seem very small indeed. Kirk's orders were to park on the edge of the neutral zone and fire the 72 stealthy long-range torpedoes at the Klingon homeworld, Kronos, to kill Khan. But the Marcus-ordered sabotage knocked the Enterprise out of warp 20 minutes short of their destination, so the ship shouldn't even be at the edge of the neutral zone yet. If that's the case, then why does Sulu say it's 20 minutes in enemy space we weren't counting on? And then why does Khan say the ship is stranded on the edge of Klingon space, then refer to them being in Klingon space? Which is it? When the warp core finally gets repaired and Kirk orders the Enterprise to hot-foot it back to Earth, only minutes appear to pass before the Vengeance overtakes them and blows them out of warp within Mark 1 eyeball range of Earth. That would make Kronos farther from the Enterprise's stranded position than Earth was. How does that make any sense? And speaking of Kronos, number 3. Take it to the roach limit. In the 10 Dumbest Things in Star Trek 2009, we groused about how lots of TV and film science fiction portrays planets in preposterously close quarters. Into Darkness takes the cake in this regard, as it portrays the Klingon planet Kronos effectively kissing a shattered moon. Maybe Praxis, maybe not. Planets can only remain spheres or spheroids if they are far enough apart that the tidal forces of their gravitational interactions don't tear them both apart, or the gravity of the more massive doesn't shred the lesser. That distance is called the roach limit. Outside it, intact body. Inside it, rubble or rings. For that Klingon moon to not moonfall right down its orbital velocity would have to be crazy fast, and the chunks trailing off behind it would possess lower orbital velocities than those skimming the atmosphere. They'd never line up as seen in the film. Unless that moon was hurled directly into that atmosphere-grazing orbit, the tidal forces from Kronos would have long ago reduced it to short-lived rings as it gradually moved closer and closer. The effect wouldn't be limited to the moon. Kronos itself would be distorted by the intense tidal forces and end up as molten as the inside of that supervolcano on Nibiru. Even a million of Spock's dumb super ice cube fusion gizmos couldn't fix that. Number 2. Starfleet? What Starfleet? When the Vengeance first knocks the Enterprise out of warp, Suda reports the ship is 237,000 kilometers from Earth, which would put the ship 38% closer to our planet than our moon is. Yet we see the moon in the background and the Earth farther beyond this, a view that would happen if the range were in miles and not kilometers. Metric versus imperial confusion reigns. Ignoring the visual incongruity, the big question is, where the photon is everyone? And by everyone, I mean Starfleet. The two ships are right at Earth's doorstep, and the big bad is pounding the snot out of the hero ship. Does Starfleet not even notice? Even assuming the Vengeance is a super stealth ship, can it extend that stealth in a manner that prevents Starfleet scanners from detecting the Enterprise as well? The battle debris, the energy signatures of the weapons being fired, the comms exchange between the ships. And even granting all this, what about when the 72 torpedoes go boom in the Vengeance's guts? Is it still magically invisible then? Mind you, Uhura gets a video call through to Spock Prime on New Vulcan, wherever that is, but is apparently unable to call Starfleet headquarters right next door and ask for help? Seriously, are there 0 Federation starships around Earth? Is the fleet still in the Laurentian system as in the last movie? Does the space station or dock orbiting above San Francisco, from which the Enterprise was deployed, have no tractor beams? Or are Starfleet's space cadets too busily engaged in the timeless act of naval contemplation to notice? Does anything get dumber than this? Well, number 1, that Khan Noonien Singh thing. You probably saw this coming, but the inclusion of Khan is the movie's dumbest element. Not the casting of Benedict Cumberbatch in the role. Khan's ethnicity has always been problematic, beginning with the sad Hollywood tradition of casting anyone perceived as ethnic to play practically any role that isn't lily white. Ricardo Montalban's parents were from Spain, and just as European as Cumberbatch, neither actor looked the part of a Punjabi Sikh. Nor is it the pointless misdirection of John Harrison to try and maintain a surprise that wasn't any such thing. A true John Harrison character who'd turned against the military excesses of Starfleet would relate to the story themes. But Khan is wholly incidental to the tale being told. The real villain of the piece is Marcus. The end justifies the means philosophy he espouses, and the immoral lengths such thinking leads to. But Marcus is narratively airlocked at the end of the second act in favour of the incidental Khan and his OTT theatrics. The writers were so goddamn determined to shoehorn Star Trek's supposedly greatest villain, who I find a little bit overrated, Team Ducat, into this film, that they undermined the script to do so, made all the worse by the fan-wanky and obvious inversion of the sacrifice ending of the Wrath of Khan. Khan's always been a little bit overrated, and his pointless inclusion in this film renders what could have been a truly compelling story down to a Star Trek into dumbness. The J.J. Abrams directed Star Trek movies were box office successes, but not super profitable given their, for a Trek film, relatively high budgets. For the third installment, Abrams yielded the director's chair to Fast and Furious franchise director Justin Lin. Of the three Kelvin timeline films, Lynn's 2016 Star Trek Beyond was the least controversial amongst the franchise's fandom. Finally, Kirk was a seasoned commander and not a hothead, Spock was not prone to an emotional outburst every 5 seconds, and McCoy finally got to have some of that classic bantering with Spock that fans have been jonesing about since the original cast bowed out in 1991's The Undiscovered Country. Even Uhura and Scotty had meaty parts, and while Sulu and Chekhov were not quite as well served, they weren't sidelined. Despite these improvements, it underperformed at the box office compared to its predecessors. Despite some epic set pieces, many viewers felt the film's scale was slight, and paradoxically it came across as more safe and perhaps less ambitious by being less controversial. While the film suffers from fewer overall dumb moments than its predecessors, where it does go dumb, it goes there in a big way. One might say it goes beyond them in terms of dumbness that hurts the film. I'm Sean Ferry for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 dumbest things in Star Trek Beyond. Number 10. The Nebula. There's been some grousing about Trek's comic book portrayal of space in the past, but the so-called nebula, identified as a necro cloud in Cinefex magazine number 148, here takes the cake. It's dumb as a box of, well, rocks. It's not a nebula, it's a freaking wall of asteroids. Even as an asteroid field, it makes no sense. Gravity works, and a bunch of giant rocks moving slowly about one another are going to gradually congeal into larger and larger bodies. There's no way they're going to remain a set of rocky chompers a la Galaxy Quest. To paraphrase Gwen DeMarco's assessment from that film, someone on the Enterprise should have said, "I am not doing it. This movie was badly written." Chompers aside, a point is made that it takes the Enterprise to go through this barrier because it has the best navigational system in the fleet. So how do our heroes get the beat-up, comparatively ancient USS Franklin through without a hitch? And this hazard is so dumb that it's no barrier at all. Once the Enterprise arrives on the Altamide side, there are stars visible in almost all directions, which means this isn't some rocky bubble around the planet. It's some preposterous wall suspended between the Yorktown and the planet. But if we don't suffer from the two-dimensional thinking, then the obvious solution to this so-called barrier is just fly around the damn thing, making the entire premise false. Number 9. The Abranath. The long-gone Ancient Ones on Altamide forged this horrible bioweapon, then decided it was bad. Okay, so their solution? Split it in two and throw both parts into space. Couldn't they break it more thoroughly? Or will it always find someone willing to use it until it is unmade in the fires of Mount Doom? That silliness aside, it's inconsistent demonstrated behaviour. When first tested by the movie's villain, Krall, aka Edison, its black death dust zips right to poor Ensign Sill and shreds her in the time it takes her to run to the door. But when activated in Starbase Yorktown for a similar quantity of the dust, spins complacently around the frisbee. And even when Krall Edison is thrown into it, it spins harmlessly around him without taking a nip. It does so from the time he falls into it at the centre of the station all the way to the space outside, a distance of like 13 kilometres, when it finally chews him up. Speaking of the death dust, we're meant to believe this frisbee-sized doomsday device is somehow a threat to the millions of inhabitants on Starbase Yorktown, which has a volume of almost 9 trillion cubic metres. Just how much of this dust can this handheld contraption make? If you guessed as much as the story requires in a given moment, you're correct. Number 8. 20th century fetishism. Star Trek has never really been about the future, it's been about people of today in a fantasy future. Roddenberry's description, "The vessel is a kind of magic carpet with scientific basis and jargon, but no less magical for it," was written in his 1974 Starship concept for filmation. But it could just as easily apply to the USS Enterprise. But where possible, its makers did go out of their way to try and make the setting as futuristic as the practicalities of time and budget allowed. Irvin Allen shows, like Lost in Space or The Time Tunnel, might be chock full of surplus contemporary hardware. But Star Trek built what it could for its strange new worlds. Towards that end, attempts were made to avoid depicting things like clothing closures, wristwatches, and food preparation, reasoning that just as a zipper would be alien to the people of the 17th century, such things in Star Trek's time would be alien to us. But starting with Star Trek II appurtenances of our times increasingly snuck into its far-flung future, to the point where the people of the 23rd and 24th centuries seem to have fetishized the late 20th. So when Kirk finds a motorcycle on the crashed USS Franklin, heaven forbid it's anything but a contemporary make. At least Kirk's bike, seen in 2009, was a futuristic model. It's not product placement, as the PX-70 motorcycle is heavily customized for the film. So one wonders why the filmmakers made this choice. The obvious answer is they think the audience can't get involved in the story unless it constantly evokes our familiar world,
from familiar objects to popular music like Public Enemy's Fight the Power and the Beastie Boys' Sabotage. Underestimating your audience is dumb. Number 7. Swarm silliness. When the swarm ships overwhelm the Enterprise, streams of them shoot right through the hull and out the other side, causing explosive decompression and the obligatory Kelvin timeline shots of people getting shot into space via explosive decompression. But dozens of these killer darts also embed themselves in the starship's hull and disgorge drones to subdue the Enterprise crew and allow Krall to attempt his Abranath fetch quest. But why don't any of these boarding breaches lead to explosive decompressions of their own? Why doesn't the damaged hull give way around them? I guess we're expected to believe that every single one of them makes a perfect airtight seal on impact. Okay, sure. Just how tough are these swarm bees anyway? Both the Enterprise saucer and the beat-up old Franklin are strong enough to knock off gigantic chunks of mountains without themselves being pulverized, which seems really inconsistent with the hero ship being shredded by a bunch of alien lawn darts. Yet these starship-slicing swarm ships insta-explode the moment they bump into each other. That's just silly. Number 6. The Franklin's Disappearing Act. Jayla's light refraction trick hiding the crashed USS Franklin is more for the benefit of the audience than the story, allowing for a dramatic reveal of the ship and its mountaintop perch. But hiding the ship in this manner doesn't make a lot of sense in these circumstances. Given Krall and company crashed on Altamede aboard the ship, they surely know its whereabouts. So, given it's a known wreck, why does Jayla hide it? Sure, maybe the drones flying the swarm ships wouldn't pay attention to a missing shipwreck, but the moment Krall or his minions Kalara or Manus noticed it was gone, you'd think they'd look to the bottom of the impossibly high cliff to see what was left of it. The fact there's no wreck there would instantly signal something fishy was going on, and maybe draw them right to the spot. There's something to be said for hiding in plain sight. Circumstances imply that the planet is littered with shipwrecks from which Krall gets his victims to suck dry, examples being the 3 aliens from which Jayla rescues Montgomery Scotty. But the film fails to depict a landscape littered with such derelicts. In their absence, vanishing the Franklin would doubly stick out like a sore thumb. Number 5. Watch that first step. In one of Beyond's least convincing effect shots, Scotty leaps from his improvised torpedo as escape pod just as it plummets off a cliff. To our eye, the drop is clearly at least a kilometre. Scotty then hoofs it down to what remains of the torpedo, where he is threatened by aliens rescued by Jayla. Listen, I've done hikes from a kilometre-high cliff top to a valley below, and it takes hours, and can be pretty tiring even going mostly down. Scotty does this with no water and then manages to follow Jayla up to the USS Franklin perch at the top of some mountain, a mountain from which said ship later plummets off the aforementioned impossible cliff. VFX artists on the film pegged it at 5,500 metres, about 18,000 feet, which is taller than any mountain in the United States outside of Alaska and 4 times higher than the highest point in the UK. Even assuming the cliff Scotty's pod fell off was shorter than the Franklin high dive, the Franklin is still on top of a mountain, so Scotty still had one hell of a climb to reach it. Is he a mountain goat? Is Starfleet fitness training just that good? Or did nobody really think this through? I think we all know the answer to that one. Number 4. Isn't that convenient? Movies thrive on coincidence, but can easily lean into stupidity when coincidence teeters into contrivance. Such is the case with Krall's entire plan around the Abranath. Consider, Krall and Co. have this vast fleet of swarm ships, which clearly number in the tens of thousands, if not millions, which make short work of the most advanced ship in Starfleet and mincemeat out of Yorktown's apparently formidable defence perimeter. A dozen starships wouldn't stand a chance against them, so why the need for the Abranath at all? Does Krall really need Yorktown's advanced technology? Is said tech so much more sophisticated than what he already has? And even assuming that's the case, how long did he plan to sit on Altamede waiting for this palm-sized piece of doomsday weapon to fall into his hands? Space is big, that thing is tiny. If the Fibonan Republic hadn't handed it to Kirk, how much longer would Krall have sat on his hands? Another century or two? Fortunately for him, the plot contrives to have Kirk bring him the MacGuffin of his dreams. That's definitely dumb. Number 3. That's Krall, folks. Nero, Khan, and Krall, all 3 Kelvin Universe villains are motivated by their desire for retribution. Revenge may be a dish best served cold, but apparently it must be served as the main course at every meal where these films are concerned. One can argue that Krall's motivations are beyond mere vengeance because he professes frustration with the Federation, its peacenik exploration-mindedness, and he's concluded that peace and unity are somehow a weakness. But that's the problem. His multiple overlapping motivations don't make him complex as much as muddled. On the one hand, Krall is a throwaway allegory on societies that train soldiers to be killing machines and that don't make an effort to reintegrate them into a peaceful society.
but even the flawed Next Generation episode The Hunted did a better job at this. On another, he's depicted as a former soldier who cannot accept that violent struggle isn't necessary for societies to advance, but only pays lip service to this. And if we're being honest, most veterans who've experienced the horrors of war don't seek out more of it. They've had their fill. So there's a certain intellectual dishonesty to the idea that Edison as Krall would be willing to kill innocent millions, including civilians, after fighting 2 wars to save them. Sure, there's a thematic point about how easy it is to get lost out in deep space, but Krall's murky motivations aren't so much his getting lost as him having gone cuckoo. This just makes him another nutso Nero from 2009, and once was enough. Number 2. The Kaboom Box. The film's eureka moment is the one where the reassembled Enterprise crew devises a solution to Krall's swarm, each character pouncing on what the previous person said with another piece of the solution. It's a common enough gimmick in caper stories, but how they come to their conclusion makes zip sense. Uhura's realization they weren't jamming us, they were talking to each other, leads Spock to, illogically, suggest a disruptive communication signal might affect the swarm's capacity to coordinate. Great, but what makes Scotty think that a very high frequency will do the trick? Why does Kirk jump from that to the very specific WHF bandwidths, which, as electromagnetic frequencies go, are fairly low, despite the name? And how does Sulu make the flying leap that doing so could cause a chain reaction that would wipe out the whole swarm? Why does Kirk conclude it needs to be loud and disruptive when we've seen no sign that the drones are affected by sound? Finally, from where in thin air does Uhura happen to come up with 57.7 MHz specifically, which would have been in the old analog TV broadcast frequency range of the very high frequency in both the US and UK? We're not the only ones questioning this. Virtually none of this is set up, despite plenty of opportunities to do so. It could have been, and here you thought we were going to grouse about the beats and shouting songs. Number 1. Insufficient amounts of Idris. On top of Krall Edison being such a motivational mess, the film squanders the potential of its primary antagonist through choices made about and by the actor playing him. As human beings, we respond strongly to faces, so anytime an actor gets buried under heavy makeup, they are at an immediate disadvantage unless the actor can find a way to act through it all. Think Louis Gossett Jr. in Enemy Mine or Ron Perlman in many of his roles, to make it come alive. Sadly, Idris Elba doesn't achieve this. For much of his screen time, he's under so much makeup that he's not just unrecognisable, all the subtle expression he can bring to his face is smothered under silicone appliances. It's to the point that he's effectively voice acting the role. Worse, Elba reportedly asked to have less dialogue than scripted because he felt the more Krall said, the less impactful it was. But since his voice was the main tool he had left in his repertoire, and the one part of his performance that wasn't strangled under all that makeup, the result is an expressionless, okay, he scowls a lot, but adversary with few lines to sell the character, and even that's hampered by an over-processed voice. The result is uninteresting and not even hissable. How in the name of hell does an Idris Elba character who shreds the Enterprise be so forgettable? That, my friends, is the epitome of dumb.
Star Trek Section 31 has been on many minds since its release at the end of January 2025. There have been discussions, arguments, laughing sessions, and even some tears. Say what one wants about the film, it hasn't been a dull time for discourse, that's for sure. Initial reactions panned the film, while many critics tore into it with the vigour of a starving Grishnar cat. There were missed opportunities and quite a few downs. But putting all else aside, what were the real clunkers in this motion picture? Was it the shimmering starship? Was it the age gaps that burned calendars to ashes? Was it even the decision to take a long-awaited character exploration and then vaporise them within moments? There's plenty to pick from. So if you're not sick of the sight of us yet, grab a sip of elixir from Virgil and let's dive into the dumbest details. I'm Ellie for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 dumbest things in Star Trek Section 31. Number 10. Those mission log entries. As we now know, Section 31 was planned as an ongoing series. The pandemic, combined with Michelle Yeoh's Oscar win for Everything Everywhere All at Once, put paid to that plan. The story was then condensed into a film. Only, was it? There are 3 distinct chapters. One Night at the Baram, The God's End, and The Passageway, followed by a coda 3 of Your Earth weeks later. These chapter headings are accompanied by obvious shifts in the story. In effect, we still receive episodes within this film. When given several years to rework a series into a film, why didn't Section 31 do just that? Rather than feel like a cohesive movie, these chapter headings are clear reminders that the audience were once promised separate episodes to explore the story. By keeping these headings in place, they serve only to highlight the script's lack of motion picture credentials. A handy pause point they may be, but that doesn't save them from being a dumb addition to the film. Number 9. It's not always so black and white. There's something striking about a black and white outfit, so much so that fashion houses have included the bold pairing for time beyond measure. It's so chic, so in, so now. In Section 31, it's so thoughtless, so uninspired, and so bland. Now, this is less about the outfit choice and all about the alien choice. Why are we including a resident from the planet Charon here? Delighted as one may be to find a survivor from the bloody civil war that ruined so much of their world, one may find themselves a little more confused when one stops to think about it. Charon had been a dead planet for thousands of years by the time Beale and Loki returned in Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. For another survivor to simply pop up barely 60 years later, serving as a valet aboard a criminal space station, all seems a bit convenient? Something that bears mention? The entire ending of the original series episode hinges on the power of Spock's words. All dead. Seems they should have added an asterisk or two there, perhaps, just saying. Number 8. Super amazing, not so rare technology that stops working right away. If there's one certainty in Star Trek, it's that your super amazing future technology is going to break at exactly the moment you need it the most. So too is true of the phasing trinket that Giorgio uses to evade Data No. It works a treat until a mysterious stranger turns up using the exact same tech. Bit of a coincidence there, isn't it? And let's also note, Giorgio had just highlighted that this was an unusual boon to have in her possession, so for San to have his own seems unlikely. They proceed to knock each other about for a bit, though of course, it's only Giorgio's doodad that starts to fritz. As she chases her quarry through solid walls, her foot gets stuck, causing her to trip and remain down just long enough to see San take the godsend away, which we'll get back to in a second. If her foot phased with the wall, wouldn't it be crushed a la In Theory, and that poor officer in the floor? Doesn't it all seem just a bit handy rather than footsy? Isn't it all just a little Number 7. Just what is San's plan, really? The big magical MacGuffin in Section 31 is the Godsend, a super weapon commissioned by Emperor Giorgio in the Mirror Universe that has the power to wipe out entire quadrants. Okay, that sounds like a pretty standard piece of Terran tech, to be fair. However, the Emperor ordered it destroyed. Rather than complying, a very not dead San orchestrated a series of events that brought it into his possession to do what, exactly? His hopes, travel to the Prime Universe, kill everyone, take some resources, are as half-baked as the Godsend itself. First, this thing is like a virus that can hop from planet to planet. Does it target only organic material? How does it differentiate between human and animal life? That's not even to begin discussing whether it can differentiate between humans and other alien species. Does it leave plant life alone? If San planned to strip the Prime Universe of its resources to refuel the Terran Empire, then how could he ever be assured of the weapon's limitations? Was he just going to chuck a live grenade into a pile of people and hope it doesn't hurt anyone? Speaking of San, Number 6. San's super plan to beat the Emperor at swordplay. San is a thinly written character, one who serves more as a plot along than an actual villain. While he may be the one responsible for bringing the team to their eventual battleground, he was clearly steeling himself for a sword fight with Giorgio. The evidence? Giorgio's sword, presumably the one that burnt half of his face, is displayed prominently on the bridge of his ship. It's Chekhov's gun principle 101. Don't bring a gun on stage if you don't intend to fire it. That sword was always going to be part of the climax. Except, why? San was quite obviously at a disadvantage against Giorgio, even if we are to believe that he was capable of her level of machinations. He may have been introduced as one of the last two survivors in the Hunger Games Terran edition, but he had refused to deal a fatal blow to his family, thus dealing a fatal blow to his family. Did he then spend his years training with a sword to enact his revenge on Georgiou? If vengeance was always his plan, did he account for her travelling to the Prime Universe, travelling forward in time, then back in time, then somehow losing her sword-fighting skills? By the time they face off, the audience was hoping she'd just make it a quick death and save him the pain. Number 5. The Big Brooch. The Baram is enormous. That's not a bad thing, provided there are transporters on board. Imagine, if you will, waking up late for a shift one day in Georgiou's bar. Now try imagining that same morning if you lived on the outermost ring, there was no transporter and you had to run to tend bar. It's hardly the worst design that's ever appeared in Star Trek, though one wonders the efficacy of a space station shaped like a big brooch, populated entirely by criminals, thieves and con men, with its own warp engines to boot. It's conspicuous, to be blunt. Section 31 found it without much hassle, as did San and a whole bunch of ne'er-do-wells. Considering the station is shown flying away at the end of the film, along with the host of ships surrounding it, why exactly does it need to be a station at all? The film seemed to look at Federation HQ from Star Trek Discovery and decide, yes, more of that please. Number 4. Squandering the gifts your mama gave ya. Quasi is the second Cameloid that we know of to ever appear in Star Trek. Iman portrayed Martia in Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country, showing off her morphing talents to great effect. With Quasi, there was an opportunity to meet a Cameloid who could help widen the established lore of these mysterious beings. Instead, we got a Yo Mama joke. Sam Richardson does well with the material given to him, and we are told had fun with improvisation on set, but Quasi's Cameloid status seems almost meaningless in the grand scheme of things. In a film that seemed intent on playing up the espionage elements of its story, it would have made sense to utilise the one member of the team who can be anyone. There is one imagined scene in which Michelle Yeoh plays Quasi playing Georgiou, and another where Amari Hardwick plays Quasi playing Alok. Other than that, he turns into a giant starfish. And that's all. Bringing back a rarely seen or spoken of alien? Smart. Failing to use them in any really significant way? Dumb. Number 3, the dialogue. There's a fine line that has to be walked when one includes contemporary dialogue in a period-specific script. When one is writing about the past, one is locked into the speech patterns of the time, with an exhaustive list of exceptions, of course we know. When one is writing about the future, there is far more freedom in what the writer can do. However, including very contemporary language is hazardous. In Section 31, some moments of dialogue jump off the page, through the screen and belt the viewer around the head. Mecha boom boom, chaos is my friends with benefits, your mama for? Oh dear. Including comedic lines is nothing new to Star Trek, nor should the franchise ever actively avoid comedy in general. There are many examples of how the long-running property has melded comedy and the contemporary, yet still maintained that feeling of timelessness. Section 31 does its utmost to lock the dialogue, and therefore the events of the film in the early 2020s, battering the audience with colloquialisms that seem far more concerned with sounding hip than eliciting a genuine laugh. Comedy has every place in the future. Can the same be said for some of the ultra-generationally specific references? Number 2, killing off the crew before we had a chance to care. Star Trek has often relied on a shock death to pack a punch. Discovery considers a day without 3 deaths a dull affair, much like a Dothraki wedding then. But there is a balance that needs to be struck before bumping off the supporting cast. Consider the slew of red shirts that have met the great bird of the galaxy throughout the years. They were never meant to be much more than disposable stake lifters. For the most part, they do their job well, and we salute them. Mel's death is a frustrating affair. Why on earth would the script bring back a Deltan, show them fully in control of their powers and ready to use them to aid the mission, and then vaporize her so aggressively early? Zeph was a chance to dive into the muscle of the group and explore what made him tick, and what led to his mechanical mass, and instead there is a horrific scene of the suit turning against him. Both deaths were meant to shock the audience, though both just felt like a quota for deaths had to be met and they picked the short straws. Gratuitous death is nothing new in the franchise, but there is a lot to be said for a smart use of death, rather than a dumb decision to thin the numbers. Number 1, lost the run of itself. Setting the film in the Lost era was initially a stroke of genius. This largely unexplored period of Star Trek's history was an open season for adventures and mishaps, with just enough historical events of note to help shape the scene. Except for Rachel Garrett, there is nothing in Section 31 to tie the action to the time in which it's set. Therein lies 2 issues, the first being this seemingly cavalier choice of time. Interviews with the producers have suggested the era was chosen to free the action up from affecting too much around it, which at least does make sense. However, Garrett's inclusion encourages the audience to think of Enterprises, be they today or yesterday. If one can put that aside, one then has to wonder, just how the hell is Sam there and looking so young? The film, set in 2323, would be roughly 120 years after his birth. Georgiou travelled to this time via Carl, aka the Guardian of Forever, which explains her youth. Even if we allow for a greater endurance to aging in the Mirror Universe, Sam looks good for his age. The technology of the time seems a bit of a mix, though one can see that care was taken in some of the LCAR displays to match the passage of time. When combined with the context of Discovery, the original series, and the next generation to follow, one must conclude that Section 31 stands out in this time like a sore thumb. The decision to keep it separate from the action in the shows around it was a smart one. Locking it into a specific era with so many established happenings was truthfully pretty dumb.